Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. The main character wakes up inside of Star Wars after he dies in his previous life. He finds out he has a system which lets him create Spartan soldiers from Halo.
She's not worried. Kale didn't look away. She never is. Confident. Or stupid. Rill gave the faintest smirk. You'd know. Kale exhaled through his nose but didn't rise to it. They waited until the man finally closed the case, sealed it, and carried it deeper into the hollow. Kura followed with him. The guards shifted but remained outside. Kale lowered the scope. She's moving further in. Rill adjusted her scanner. Signal still steady. Cores are inside the hollow now. Kale studied the pad again. We won't get closer without being seen. Then we don't go closer. He looked at her. You're saying we sit here? For now. He considered, then gave a short nod. The hours stretched. They shifted positions twice to keep from cramping, but neither spoke much. Kale occasionally checked the scope. Rill logged each movement on her scanner. By late afternoon, the guards were joined by a third man carrying supplies. He dropped the crate by the entrance and left without entering. Kale noted the detail. They don't let outsiders past the door. Controlled access, Rill agreed. Then whatever's inside matters. She gave a short nod. When dusk fell, lights flickered inside the hollow. Faint, pale, barely visible from their vantage point. Rill leaned forward, scanning again. Energy spike. They've activated something. Kale checked his scope. Kura's back outside. Talking with one of the guards. Tone. Casual. She's not reporting, she's confirming. Rill frowned. So she's not in charge. Not here, at least. They watched as Kura left the hollow entirely, mounting a waiting speeder and riding back toward the station. The guards remained, and the man with the armor didn't reappear. Kale said, so the cores stay. Rill's eyes narrowed. And she comes back later. Kale lowered the scope. We follow her again. No, Rill said. We follow the cores. The return to camp was quiet. Neither spoke until they reached the bikes. Only then did Rill break the silence. She's the face. Not the center. Kale strapped his gloves tighter. Agreed. She's disposable. He looked at her. And dangerous. Rill didn't argue. Back at base, Vex replayed the tracker feed across the main screen. The signal blinked steady in the hollow. He looked impressed. You actually tagged her case. Kale didn't rise to it. Rill crossed her arms. The cores are inside. Guarded. Tam frowned. By who? Unknown, Rill said. Not Republic. Not Sith. Kale added, freelance. Organized. I leaned against the console, grinning. Freelancers with Sith data cores. That's new. Vex muttered, not new. Just messy. Rill's eyes stayed on the map. Messy or not, that's where the line leads. Kale nodded once. Chapter 27, The Hollow at Night. The hollow was dark when Kale and Rill returned. The ridgewines carried dust across the plateau, but the lights below were steady, two faint beacons at the edge of the landing pad, barely enough to illuminate the guards. Kale lay flat on the ridge, scope raised. Same two. Helmets on. No rotation. Rill crouched beside him, scanner pressed against the rock. Energy levels constant. Whatever they powered up earlier, it's still running. Kale lowered the scope for a moment, checking the slope down. Loose shale, no clear cover until the last 30 meters. If we move now, will be seen. Then we don't move now, Ril said calmly. Kale gave a faint exhale that almost passed for a laugh. You've got patience tonight. Unlike you. He didn't argue. They waited. An hour passed, then another. The guards barely shifted. Once, one of them walked a slow circle near the entrance, then returned to his spot. The other never moved. Ril whispered, "No shift change." Kale nodded. Sloppy. They're tired. Or confident. Same thing. She gave a faint smirk, then adjusted her scanner. There's a narrow blind spot on the left slope. Energy readings are weaker there. Kale raised his scope again, scanning the angle. The slope she pointed out was jagged, with a fallen boulder half buried in the dirt. It offered partial cover if they moved low. We take that path, Kale said. Ril closed her scanner. Then let's move. The descent was slow. Every step sent pebbles skittering, and Kale paused often to listen. The guards didn't react. The wind masked the noise. At 30 meters, they reached the boulder. Both crouched behind it, pressed against the stone. The guards were close enough now that Kale could hear the faint hum of their helmet filters. Ril leaned close. We can't take the door. Too exposed. Kale studied the hollow's edge. There. To the right of the main entrance, a narrow fissure ran up the rock face. Small, uneven, but it looked like it connected deeper in. Ril followed his gaze. Climb. Kale nodded once. Climb. The fissure was tight. They moved one at a time, boots scraping against stone, hands gripping rough edges. Ril climbed first, her movements steady, controlled. Kale followed close behind, his carbine slung tight across his back. At the top, the fissure opened into a narrow ledge overlooking the hollow's interior. They crouched low, staying in shadow. The view revealed more than the ridge had shown. Inside, the hollow had been hollowed deeper, carved into chambers supported by metal braces. Lights lined the walls, dim but steady. At the center, a large console array flickered with data streams. The armored man from earlier stood near it, watching the screens. Two more workers moved between crates, carrying equipment. Kale whispered, "Not just storage. That's a full relay hub." Ril adjusted her scanner, reading the energy flow. Signal routing. They're moving data from the cores into the hub. Kale frowned. So the hollow's a transfer point. And not Republic. Or Sith, Kale added. Ril's eyes narrowed. Freelance. Kale gave a quiet grunt. Messy. They stayed on the ledge for nearly half an hour, watching the operation. The armored man occasionally spoke to the workers, pointing at crates or data cores. His presence was commanding, but not military. Ril whispered, "He's the coordinator." Kale didn't disagree. At one point, Kura returned. She entered with another case, handed it off, and spoke briefly with the armored man. Her tone was casual, almost familiar. They worked like colleagues, not commander and subordinate. Kale muttered, "She's more tied in than she lets on." Ril said, "We already knew that. Now we know how much." They watched as Kura left again. The guards outside shifted slightly to let her pass, then returned to position. Ril whispered, "We've seen enough." Kale hesitated, eyes still on the hub. "Not yet." She looked at him. "You want more?" "I want to know what they're rooting." Ril shook her head. "We can't pull that from here." "Then we go closer." "Too risky." Kale gave her a sidelong glance. "You're worried." She smirked faintly. "Someone has to be." They stayed longer, logging every movement. Eventually, the armored man left the hub, heading deeper into the hollow. The workers powered down some of the consoles, leaving only the core systems running. Kale tapped Ril's arm. "That's our chance." She gave him a sharp look. "You're serious?" He nodded. "We get close, plant another tag, then pull back." Ril exhaled quietly. "Fine. But fast." They descended carefully, slipping from the fissure to the hollow floor. The workers were distracted, focused on the crates. The guards outside never looked in. Kale led, moving low across the shadows. He reached the base of the hub console, knelt, and pulled a second tracker from his vest. He pressed it under the edge, where the lights wouldn't reach. The device blinked once, then went dark. "Tagged," he whispered. Ril scanned the crates quickly. "Cores are stacked. At least 6. More than what Kara carried." Kale frowned. "She's not the only courier." "No," Ril said quietly. "She's just the most trusted." They didn't linger. The workers turned, and both slipped back into shadow, retracing their path to the fissure. The climb back up was tense, every sound amplified in the stillness. But they reached the ledge without incident. Kale crouched low, watching the hub one last time. "Now we leave." Ril nodded. Finally. The return to base was silent. Only when they arrived did the tension ease. Vex nearly fell out of his chair when the second tracker pinged. "You actually planted one inside." Kale dropped into the bench, silent. Ril crossed her arms. "Now you can trace what they're rooting." Vex grinned. "And I will." Tam frowned. "If they find it." "They won't," Kale said simply. I leaned against the console, grinning. "See? Easy. Told you patience pays off." Ril gave me a flat look. "You didn't wait in the fissure." I chuckled. "That's why I let you two do it." Chapter 28, Pulling the Signal. The tracker pulsed steady on the console. Vex had 3 displays open, each one streaming different strands of code. His hands moved quick, tapping out commands, dragging windows, swearing under his breath when one of the signals dropped for a second before reconnecting. Ril stood behind him, arms folded, watching every flicker on the screen. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Vex could feel her watching, and it made him mutter even more. Kale leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He'd been silent since the return, but his eyes hadn't left the screens either. Tam sat at the table, polishing the receiver on his blaster with slow, deliberate motions. He wasn't distracted, he was listening. I leaned over Vex's chair. "So? You going to impress us, or is this just another one of your late-night shows?" "Shut up," Vex muttered. "It's aligning." "Aligning what?" I asked cheerfully. "The hub signal. They're routing through 4 relays before sending it off-world." I whistled. "Off-world? Expensive." "Not that expensive," Vex said. "This isn't heavy cargo. It's data. And data is light." Kale spoke up. "Destination. Working on it." Ril leaned closer. "Can you trace beyond the relays?" "If I boost the tracker." Tam frowned. "Boost it and they'll notice." "Not if I do it in bursts." Kale said evenly, "Then do it." Vex glanced at him. "You don't order me." I clapped Vex on the shoulder. "He's not ordering. He's encouraging." Vex swatted my hand away. "You're both insufferable." Ril's voice cut through, calm but sharp. "Focus." Vex groaned but tapped a series of commands. The tracker pulse brightened on the display, spiking for 3 seconds, then fading back to normal. The screen filled with new data. Vex's eyes widened. There. Got it. Routing confirms, outer rim transport lane. Not local. They're bouncing to a ship. Tam paused polishing. What ship? Vex scrolled through the readout. Registry masked. Civilian tags, but the code doesn't match. It's a cover. Kale's tone sharpened. Meaning? Meaning someone is paying for a ghost ship to pick up Sith-coded data cores. I grinned. Now we're getting somewhere. Vex ran the burst again. More data appeared, scrambled but readable in parts. Rill leaned over his shoulder. Coordinates. Yes, Vex said quickly. But not final. Just the jump point. They're planning to hand the data to the ship at a rendezvous outside the system. Kale asked, when? Vex tapped faster. Cycle logs say tomorrow night. 1800 hours standard. Tam's eyes narrowed. That's less than a day. Exactly. Rill asked quietly, so the cores won't stay in the hollow. No, Vex said. They're already prepping for transfer. Kale uncrossed his arms. Then we hit them before the ship arrives. Rill looked at him. Too many guards. Too much risk. Better than losing the trail, Kale said. Vex raised a hand. You're both missing the point. I can pull more. If I stretch the burst longer, I can catch the ship's true ID. Not just the ghost tag. Tam shook his head. And if you stretch it, they'll know. Vex smirked. Maybe. Or maybe they'll think it's noise. I leaned forward. Do it. Worst case, they get spooked. Best case, we find out who's pulling the strings. Rill's eyes flicked to me. You're reckless. I smiled at her. You like it? She didn't answer. Vex keyed the burst again. This time he held it longer 5 seconds. The console lights flickered, data streams jumped, and one of the side screens spat out a string of numbers that didn't match the others. There, Vex said, pointing. That's the ID. Not ghosted. Not masked. Kale stepped closer. Name. Vex grinned. Transport vessel, Registry Theta 74. Known Republic supply ship. But it was decommissioned 3 years ago. Tam frowned. So it's a fake. Not fake. Stolen. Rill's arms tightened across her chest. Which means they're using Republic ships to move Sith data. Kale's jaw tightened. That's treason. I whistled again. Big word. Bigger problem. Vex sat back, clearly satisfied. Now you see why I'm good. I grinned. We never doubted you. We just doubted your attitude. Rill said flatly, both deserve doubting. Kale smirked faintly, then turned serious again. We need to decide. Do we stop the ship, or do we use it to trace further? The room went quiet for a moment. Each of us thinking through the options. Tam finally broke it. If we let it go, we risk losing it completely. That ship could vanish into 100 systems. Rill countered, if we take it, we expose ourselves too early. We still don't know who's behind the hollow. We'll cut the line before we see the head. Kale looked at me. You decide. I leaned back, tapping the console absently. My grin was still there, but my tone was steady now. We play this smart. But we don't sit forever. Too much sitting and we end up like those guards, blind and useless. Vex muttered, speak for yourself. I clapped him on the shoulder again, harder this time. You're the exception. You're loud and useless. He groaned. Why do I work with you? Because you love me, I said cheerfully. Rill's eyes rolled. Tam shook his head. Kale didn't react. The tracker pulsed again, steady as before. The Hollow's equipment hadn't shifted. The cores were still there, still prepping. Rill said, "We have until tomorrow night." Kale nodded. "Then we move before then." Chapter 29, Listening at the Wire. The tracker feed pulsed steady, every beat pushing faint lines across Vex's screens. He hunched over the console, chewing the inside of his cheek while his fingers danced across the controls. "I can stretch the burst longer this time," he muttered, mostly to himself. 5 seconds wasn't enough. 10 should crack the COMM buffer. Tam frowned from across the room. 10 will set off alarms. "Not if I mask the entry as static bleed," Vex shot back. Kale didn't move from his post against the wall. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. "You're guessing." "I'm improvising," Vex corrected. Rill's eyes narrowed slightly. "Improvisation isn't precision." Vex groaned. "Why do none of you understand brilliance when you see it?" I leaned against his chair with a grin. "We do. We just enjoy watching you sweat while proving it." Vex slapped my hand off the chair. "Don't distract me." Tam's voice sharpened. "Do it or don't. Just stop bragging." Vex's fingers moved faster. "Fine. But when this works, I expect all of you to admit you doubted me." Rill didn't blink. "We did." Kale added, deadpan, "Still do." Vex muttered something under his breath and triggered the burst. The tracker feed flared. For 10 full seconds, the room lights dimmed as the console strained against the surge. Numbers and codes spilled across the main screen, faster than the eye could follow. Vex's jaw tightened. Almost. The feed clicked, then steadied. A new line of data appeared clearer than before. "There," Vex breathed. "That's the COMM channel. Open, running between the Hollow and the ship." Rill leaned closer. "Can you listen?" Vex smirked. "Already am." The speakers crackled. A voice came through, faint but sharp. "Female. Transfer proceeding on schedule. Final verification required before departure." Another voice followed, male, deeper, clipped. "Verification acknowledged. Maintain signal silence until docking complete." The line cut to static. Kale's eyes narrowed. "So the ship is already en route?" "Not here yet," Vex said quickly. "That was a pre-dock confirmation. They're still at least 10 hours out." Tam crossed his arms. "But they're coming." "Yes," Vex said. "Straight to the Hollow." Rill's expression tightened. "You risked the burst for 2 sentences." Vex shook his head. "Not just 2 sentences. Voice profiles. Signal lag. Ship vector. I can build a whole picture off that." I grinned. "He's showing off again." Vex pointed at the screen, ignoring me. "See that drop in frequency mid-response? That's a long-range COMM bounce. The ship's still outside the system. Coming from the rim lane. They'll break in at the jump point we already mapped." Kale asked, "How long until they realize we tapped them?" Vex hesitated, then shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be never. Could be the next minute." Tam's jaw tightened. "Not good enough." "Life isn't good enough," Vex said. I clapped him on the shoulder. "And here I thought you didn't do drama." He groaned again. "I don't. I do results." The speakers crackled once more. Another line cut and different voice this time. "Male, younger, faster. Confirming drop status. All cores intact. Ready for transfer." The female voice answered. "Maintain readiness. Ship will not delay." Failure to hand over will result in review. Kale's eyes narrowed further. Review by who? No answer came. The line cut. Rill said quietly, "There's someone above them." Tam muttered, "Of course there is." I leaned closer to the console. "Vex, can you grab the next burst when they speak again?" He cracked his knuckles. "Easily." Rill raised an eyebrow. "You sound too confident." "That's because I am," Vex said. Kale's tone was dry. "Confidence isn't competence." Vex snapped, "You're all unbearable." I grinned. "And you love it." He triggered another burst. The console whined, lights flickering again, but this time the feed held longer. Voices spilled through short exchanges, clipped reports. "Dock secured. Cores ready for loading. Verification code received." Then, a new voice, calm, male, older. Authority in every word. "Proceed with discretion. No errors tolerated. The data must reach its destination intact." The line ended. Kale's expression tightened. "That's the one in charge." Rill agreed. "He outranks Kura. He outranks the armored coordinator." Tam asked, "Did we get an ID?" Vex tapped the screen. "No name. But the signal origin was traced, same ship. Whoever he is, he's on board." I leaned back. "Good. Saves us the trouble of chasing him across half the sector." Rill's eyes stayed on the data. "It also means if we lose the ship, we lose him." Kale's voice was low, steady. "Then we don't lose it." Vex sat back, hands raised. "That's all I can pull for now. Any longer and they'll notice." Tam said, "They'll notice anyway." "Maybe," Vex admitted. "But not tonight." I gave him a pat on the back. "See? You survived. And you didn't even break anything this time." He scowled. "Yet." Rill finally moved from the console, arms still crossed. "Now we know. The ship is coming, the data is moving, and the one in charge is on board." Kale nodded once. Tam's eyes hardened. "So what do we do?" All eyes turned to me. I grinned, though my tone was steady. "We decide if we're patient hunters, or if we spring the trap early." Chapter 30, Breaking the Chain. The decision came down without much debate. Rill didn't argue. Kale didn't hesitate. Tam frowned but didn't press. Even Vex, for all his muttering, didn't try to stop it. "The cores can't reach that ship," Rill said simply. Kale's tone was the same. "Then we end it tonight." Tam looked at me. "You're sure?" I grinned. "When am I ever sure?" He didn't smile. Rill's expression didn't shift either, though I caught the faintest spark in her eyes, the kind that only came when she had a plan already taking shape. Kale, as always, said nothing more than he needed to. The prep was methodical. Vex laid out the sabotage kit, a compact disruptor charge, 2 signal scramblers, and a timed relay spike. The disruptor was small but strong enough to fry data cores beyond recovery. The scramblers would mask their entry and exit. The spike would simulate a clean log entry so no one realized the sabotage until it was too late. Vex tapped the disruptor casing. "This burns hot. You set it near the cores, it'll melt their internals in under a minute. They'll never know until they try to upload." Kale clipped the device to his belt. "Good." Rill took the scramblers, checked the seals, and stowed them in her pack. "How long will they hold?" 10 minutes each, Vex said. 15 if you are lucky. She nodded. "Plenty." Tam leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You're gambling a lot on 10 minutes. "That's what makes it fun," I said cheerfully. He shot me a glare. Kale didn't even blink. They left after dusk, when the canyon shadows deepened and the hollow's faint lights became more obvious from the ridge. The climb was familiar now, but the risk was sharper this time. They weren't just watching. Kale led, as always, moving with deliberate care. Rill followed, her scanner slung tight, eyes fixed on every shift of the terrain. Neither wasted words. At the ridge, they settled low and scoped the pad. 2 guards again, helmets on, blasters ready. No rotation. Rill whispered, same as last night. Kale adjusted his scope. Same, but tired. Good. He lowered the scope. We take the fissure again. She nodded. The climb down was slower this time. Every sound mattered more, every scrape of boot against rock sharper in the silence. They reached the inner ledge without incident and crouched low, watching the hollow's interior. It was busier than the night before. The armored coordinator was back at the console, flanked by 2 workers. More crates were stacked near the far wall, data cores lined up in neat rows. The hum of the relay hub filled the chamber. Kale whispered, heavier watch. Rill studied the patterns. Workers distracted. Guards outside only. Inside is focused on the hub. Kale's eyes narrowed. That helps. Rill pulled out a scrambler, powered it on, and set it against the rock. The faint hum masked their signal. Kale gave a short nod. Go. They descended into the hollow shadows, moving along the edges where the light was weakest. The workers barely glanced up, focused entirely on the console. The armored man barked a few orders, but his attention never wavered from the screens. Rill moved first, slipping behind a crate. Kale followed, carbine slung, eyes sharp on every movement. Step by step, they closed the distance to the cores. At the far wall, the rows of data cores glowed faintly in their casings. The disruptor would be enough to fry them all, but it had to be set close. Kale knelt, pulled the device free, and pressed it against the crate's underside. The seal clicked. The timer blinked red. Set, he whispered. Rill's eyes flicked across the chamber. Workers didn't notice. Good. She pulled the second scrambler, powered it, and dropped it near the base of another crate. The hum thickened, distorting the sound in the chamber just enough to mask their presence. Kale adjusted his grip on the carbine. 2 more minutes. Rill watched the armored man. He hasn't looked away once. Focused. Dangerous. Kale didn't answer. The disruptor timer blinked faster, almost ready. Kale reached to set the final relay spike, one false log entry that would mask the sabotage long enough for them to escape. But then, one of the workers turned. His eyes scanned the crates, pausing just a second too long where Kale crouched. Rill's hand went to her sidearm. Kale stayed perfectly still. The worker frowned, but before he could step closer, the armored man barked his name. The worker flinched, turned back to the console, and bent over the screen. Rill exhaled slowly. Close. Kale finished the spike. Done. The disruptor pulsed once, then went dark. Its work was already done. The cores glowed faintly for another minute before flickering, one by one, as their internals fried silently. No one noticed. Not yet. Kale touched Rill's arm. Time to go. They slipped back the way they came, retracing every step with deliberate care. The scramblers hummed faintly behind them, buying just enough time. The climb up the fissure was tense, but neither spoke until they reached the ridge again. From above, the hollow looked the same: guards at the door, workers busy, the coordinator focused on the hub. But the damage was already done. Back at base, Vex nearly shouted when the tracker feed spiked. They're dying. The core's something's wrong inside. Kale dropped onto the bench, silent. Rill crossed her arms, her expression calm. Not wrong, she said. Burned. Vex spun in his chair, staring at her. You sabotaged them. Kale nodded once. Tam frowned. You realize what happens when they find out? They'll panic, Rill said. Or retaliate, Tam countered. I grinned. Either way, they won't be handing Sith data to a stolen Republic ship tomorrow night. Kale's jaw tightened, but he didn't disagree. Chapter 31, Listening to the Fallout. Vex hadn't slept. He'd been sitting at the console since Kale and Rill returned, half a dozen screens alive with data streams. His hair was a mess, his eyes ringed from staring too long, but he wasn't slowing down. Every time the tracker pulsed, his fingers twitched like he could squeeze more out of it. Rill stood behind him again, calm, arms crossed. Kale leaned against the far wall, silent, the disruptor casing still clipped to his belt. Tam sat at the table, helmet off, expression tight as he watched the scrolling code. I stretched my legs out on the bench, grinning. You look worse than the cores you fried. Vex didn't glance back. Be quiet. They'll notice any second. They haven't yet. Not until they try to run the upload, Vex muttered. Tam asked, and when will that be? Anytime now, Vex said. Rill's eyes flicked to the screen. Then be ready. Vex muttered something that sounded like an insult but was too quiet to catch. The COMM crackled suddenly, sharp and loud. A male voice burst through, fast and clipped. Failure. Multiple cores offline. Reroute now, check every unit. Another voice cut in, female, sharp. Impossible. We verified integrity yesterday. Check again. Vex's eyes lit up. They noticed. The line scrambled, then steadied. The armored man's voice came through, low and controlled, but harder than before. Lock down the chamber. No one enters until we isolate the fault. Seal the exterior. If this is sabotage, I want confirmation. Kale's eyes narrowed. They suspect already. Rill didn't move. Of course they do. Tam muttered, that didn't take long. Vex was already typing. I'm tagging their comms. Every word they speak, I'll have it logged. I grinned. Finally, entertainment. More chatter spilled through. Workers shouting over each other. Unit 3 melted. It's spreading, shut it down. Who touched the casing last? Then Kerr's voice, sharp and impatient. Stop panicking. Contain the damage and report. Now. Kale tilted his head slightly. She came back fast. Rill said, because she was ordered to. Tam frowned. Or because she was already nearby. The armored man barked again, silencing the workers. All cores compromised. Confirmed. I want the ship informed. Now. Vex smirked. There it is. Emergency signal outbound. I'm catching it. He slammed a key. The main screen filled with a burst of static, then settled into a code string. Destination locked, Vex said. The ship's receiving the report. The speakers crackled again. The same older male voice as before, the one who'd sounded like he was in charge. Explain. Immediately. Kura answered, calm but firm. Cores failed during transfer. No sign of breach. Local systems confirm a burn. Unacceptable, the voice snapped. Kale muttered, he's not pleased. Rill's tone was even. Failure exposes them. Tam said, so does yelling about it. I leaned forward. Vex, can you get a read on the ship's location? Working on it, he said quickly. Give me silence. The older voice returned. If this is sabotage, you will find the source. No transfer means no payment. Do not fail again. The line cut. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Vex slapped the console. Got it. The ship's still holding outside system. They didn't shift course yet. They're waiting to decide. Ril's eyes narrowed. And they'll decide soon. Kale finally spoke. They'll send someone hunting. Tam nodded. And we'll be the prey. I grinned. Not if we stay smarter than them. Vex muttered, smarter and faster. The hollow comms came alive again. The armored man this time, barking orders. Check every path. Trace every entry. If anyone tampered with the cores, I want their trail. Kerr's voice cut through. You'll find nothing. Whoever did it already covered themselves. Focus on securing the hub. The armored man snapped back, your failures don't give you the right to command. Ril raised an eyebrow. Tension. Kale's expression stayed flat. Cracks in the chain. Tam smirked faintly. Good. Let them fight each other. Vex grinned suddenly. Oh, this is better than I thought. The hollow just sent a secondary signal. Not to the ship side route. Someone else is listening. Ril stepped closer. Who? I don't know yet. But they're pulling in another party. Kale frowned. Back up. Or oversight, Ril said. Vex tapped faster, muttering under his breath. Come on, come on. The speakers hissed, then stabilized. A new voice came through. Smooth, male, careful. You've drawn attention. This will not be tolerated. Contain your failure or we intervene. The line cut instantly. Kale's jaw tightened. Another superior. Ril said quietly, they're not just freelancers. They're connected higher. Tam muttered, that makes this worse. I leaned back, grinning. Or better. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. Ril shot me a flat look. Not funny. I raised my hands. Fine. Half funny. Kale didn't respond. The chatter in the hollow grew more frantic. Workers scrambled. The armored man barked more orders. Kerr's voice cut and sharp, trying to steady them. The tension was thick. Vex logged it all, hands moving fast, eyes gleaming. Every word they speak digs them deeper. Whoever's running them won't like this. Tam asked, so what do we do? Kale finally looked up from the wall. We wait until they move. Then we follow. Ril nodded once. Chapter 32, The Ship Decides. The comms array hummed, lights chasing each other across Vex's console. He hadn't left the chair since the hollow meltdown began. His fingers twitched over the keys like he was playing against time itself. Signals coming back around, he muttered. The ship's not done with them. Kale shifted from the wall, straightening. Ril stayed behind Vex, silent as ever, but her eyes tracked every flicker on the main screen. Tam leaned forward at the table, forearms resting on his knees. I perched on the edge of the console, grinning down at Vex. Think they're going to yell again, or finally give up and go home? They don't give up, Vex said flatly. Ril agreed. Not with someone that far above involved. Kale's voice was low. Then they'll demand another transfer. Vex snapped his fingers. Quiet. It's opening. The speakers crackled. The same older male voice cut through calm, steady, but edged with irritation. Report status. The armored coordinator answered, his voice tense. Cores compromised beyond recovery. Containment confirmed. No external breach detected. Silence hung for a beat. Then, explain how this occurred. Kerr's voice joined, sharper. We verified the cores before transfer. They failed internally. Possibly faulty seals. There was no sign of sabotage. Ril's lips pressed together, but she didn't speak. Kale's eyes narrowed. The older voice continued, excuses will not restore what is lost. A replacement shipment must be secured immediately. The coordinator said, we have no replacements on site. That will require delay. Then delay is unacceptable, the voice snapped. You will provide an alternative within the next cycle. Vex leaned back, smirking. Told you. They're not quitting. Tam muttered, they just raised the stakes. Ril said quietly, Kura will be tasked again. Kale's tone sharpened. She's the courier they trust most. They'll use her. I folded my arms, still grinning. Then all we have to do is wait for her to step outside again. Easy. Ril shot me a look. Nothing is easy. I shrugged. I try to keep morale up. Vex groaned. Your version of morale is insufferable. The comms feed picked up again. Kerr this time, firmer than before. We can reroute through the canyon station. It will take time, but we can assemble new cores from partial caches. The older voice was silent for a long moment. Finally. Very well. You will oversee it. Deliver the replacement within 2 cycles. Failure will not be tolerated. The line cut. Vex exhaled. That's it. 2 cycles. They're giving her another chance. Kale's expression hardened. And another shipment to follow. Ril's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. She'll move tonight. Tam leaned back, crossing his arms. Then we watch her again. Vex turned in his chair. No. We do better than that. I can shadow her comms now. If she calls out to prep the caches, I'll hear every word. No more waiting on trackers. Kale's gaze didn't move. Do it. Ril added, if she leaves the hollow, we follow. I leaned toward Vex with a grin. See? Now you're the most popular person in the room. Vex glared. That's the worst part of my night. The next burst came half an hour later. Kerr's voice, quiet, measured. Prepare the secondary caches. Strip the shelf roots. Prioritize intact cores. A younger male voice answered. Acknowledged. Estimated assembly by dawn. Vex tapped the console. She's pulling from smaller sites. That means more couriers, more handlers. Ril murmured, Hask 9. Kesh 2. The rotation will continue. Kale's jaw set. And she coordinates them all. Tam shook his head. She's too valuable to them. We cut her out, the chain collapses. I smiled faintly. Good. Then all roads lead to Kura. Chapter 33, The Shadowed Path. The hollow had gone quiet after the shouting ended, but none of us left the console. Vex sat forward in his chair, drumming his fingers against the side as he ran loops of the intercepted signal again and again. Ril stayed at his back, eyes fixed on the feed without a word. Kale leaned against the wall near the door, his usual stance, arms folded, face unreadable. Tam sat at the table, his carbine laid across it, disassembled for the 3rd time that night. I broke the silence because someone had to. Well, that was fun. A little yelling, a little blame shifting. And now they've got Kura running cleanup duty. Guess that makes her the star of the show again. Ril didn't look at me. She'll move soon. Kale spoke quietly. Tonight. Vex glanced over his shoulder. She already started moving. You heard her, she's calling the handlers. The caches will be stripped before dawn. I pushed myself up from the console edge and stretched. Perfect. We'll give her company on the road. She'll never notice. Ril gave me a sharp look. We can't let her see us. Of course not, I said, smiling. We're shadows. The polite kind. The ones that don't talk back. Tam slid a piece back into his carbine with a click. That rules you out. I pointed at him. Careful. That almost sounded like a joke. He didn't smile. Kale finally straightened from the wall. We go light. No crate. Just ourselves and the bikes. Less noise. Ril nodded once. She won't risk traveling with a large team. She'll have a single escort at most. Vex turned back to the console. I'll keep her comms flagged. If she calls anyone, I'll know. But don't expect constant updates, I can't risk another burst. They'll feel it if I press too hard. Just give us what you can, Kale said. I clapped Vex on the shoulder. Relax. If anything goes wrong, I'll blame you. He groaned. You already do. We geared up quickly. Ril packed her scanner and a small disruptor pistol, nothing heavy. Kale checked his rifle twice, then set it aside for a compact carbine. I tightened the straps on my vest and made sure the charge pack on my blaster was full. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The canyon winds carried grit, but the sky was clear, stars spread wide overhead. Our bikes hummed quietly as we brought them online. Kale swung into the lead seat without a word. Ril mounted hers behind, her eyes scanning the ridgeline already. I leaned on my handlebars and grinned at them. If she catches us tonight, it's because one of you forgot how to drive quiet. Ril shot me a flat look. Kale didn't respond. We pulled out into the canyon. For the first hour, the ride was silent. The tracker Vex had slipped into Ker's gear earlier still pulsed on Kale's wrist display, steady and faint. She was moving northeast, following the rim paths where the rock cut sharp and narrow. Ril broke the quiet first. She's moving faster than before. Kale adjusted his speed to match. Because she's under pressure. Or because she's afraid. She didn't sound afraid. No, Ril agreed. She didn't. I drifted closer to them, the hum of my bike steady in the canyon air. You two really need to work on lighter conversation. You're ruining the mood. Ril didn't answer. Kale didn't even look at me. I sighed dramatically. Fine. I'll talk to myself. At least I know I'm funny. Tam's voice crackled over the comm, calm and dry. No, you're not. I grinned. See? He's getting better at this. Near midnight, the tracker signal slowed. Kura had stopped moving. Kale pulled us into a ridge cut and killed his engine. We dismounted in silence, pulling the bikes into the shadows where their light wouldn't carry. Kale checked the tracker again. She's stationary. One click ahead. High shelf. Ril pulled her scanner. Energy reading faint. She's not using the speeder core. Conserving power. Means she's meeting someone, Kale said. Or waiting for them, Ril added. I leaned against the bike, grinning faintly. Or she's taking a nap. Even smug couriers get tired. Neither of them looked amused. We moved on foot, staying low along the canyon wall. The night was quiet, save for the wind through the stone. Every step crunched faintly on the gravel, but the sound was lost quickly in the open air. Kale stopped at a rise and signaled down. Ril crouched beside him, adjusting her scanner. I crawled up to the edge and peered over. Kura's speeder was parked against the wall below, its lights dimmed, its core cold. She stood beside it, cloak pulled tight, her posture relaxed. Too relaxed for someone alone in the dark. She's waiting, Kale whispered. Rill nodded. For a courier. I whispered, do we bet on which one? Hask 9? Kesh 2? Or some new friend? Neither answered. We didn't wait long. Another speeder light glowed faintly in the distance, then dimmed as it approached. The rider dismounted a man, tall, lean, with a case slung across his back. Rill adjusted her scanner. Tag confirmed. Handler designation, Kesh 2. Kale's eyes narrowed. Same one from the canyon fork. We watched as Kura stepped forward. She didn't greet him warmly, but she didn't hesitate either. She gestured to the case, and he handed it over. She scanned it quickly, nodded, and passed him a chit. He pocketed it and turned back to his speeder without a word. Transaction complete in less than a minute. Efficient, Rill murmured. Cold, Kale said. Both, Rill agreed. Kura strapped the case to her speeder and powered it up. She didn't rush, didn't look over her shoulder, didn't show the faintest sign of nerves. She mounted and rode off without hesitation. Kale's eyes tracked the signal on his wrist. She's heading east. Toward the plateau. Rill packed her scanner. She'll circle back to the station later. I grinned. Perfect. More chances to watch her do her job. Riveting entertainment. Rill gave me another sharp look. Kale ignored me. We shadowed her for the rest of the night. Always at a distance, always just outside her range. She never looked back, never slowed more than necessary. Every stop was quick, a case handed over, a chit exchanged, and then she moved again. By dawn, she'd collected from 3 separate caches. Each time, a different handler. Each time, the same pattern. Rill logged every movement. Kale tracked every signal. I cracked jokes into the COMM until Rill threatened to cut my channel. Still, none of us forgot the weight of it. Every case she strapped down, every core she added, was another piece of the chain we were fighting to break. Back at camp, Vex was waiting with dark circles under his eyes. He didn't look up from the console as we entered. Tell me you have something. Kale dropped onto the bench. 3 caches stripped. Handlers rotated. Kura coordinated them all. Rill handed over her scanner. Logs of every pickup. Vex plugged it in, muttering as the data scrolled. Yeah, this lines up with the chatter. They'll be expecting a shipment by tomorrow night. Tam frowned. Which means we don't have long. Rill crossed her arms. She's the key. Without her, the chain collapses. Kale's expression didn't shift. Then we keep following. Chapter 34, Back into the station. By the time Kura returned to the canyon station, the sun was already high, shadows sharp against the cliffside. Her speeder rolled across the pad with a hum, dust curling up around its repulsors. The cases strapped to the back were clean, lined in precise rows. She didn't hesitate at the gate. The guards stepped aside without a question, and she vanished inside. We didn't follow immediately. Kale crouched low behind a rise just far enough to keep our bikes hidden from view. Rill adjusted her scanner, tapping through the readings. She's inside, Rill said quietly. Energy spike lifting the load into the interior. Kale nodded once. She'll store them before the transfer. I leaned on my handlebars, grinning faintly. So what's the plan this time? Walk in with another empty crate and hope she waves us through again. Rill shot me a sharp look. They'll notice if we repeat the same excuse. That's why we need variety, I said cheerfully. This time we can be cleaning crew. Everyone loves cleaners. Kale ignored me. We don't need a cover. We wait for the next shift change, then slip in with the traffic. Ril closed her scanner. That gives us less than 20 minutes. Kale stood, adjusting his gloves. Enough. We moved quickly. The station wasn't heavily guarded, never had been, but the closer we came, the more the weight pressed in. 2 guards at the entrance again, leaning on their rifles like they'd rather be anywhere else. One looked up briefly as a supply droid trundled past, then looked away. Kale walked forward first, steady and unhurried. Ril matched his pace a step behind. I followed close, keeping my expression bored, as if I belonged there. No one stopped us. The guards barely gave us a glance. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the low hum of the COMM mast. Workers moved crates, logged data, called out confirmations without raising their voices. Nothing about the station screamed importance, but we knew better now. Kale didn't slow. He headed straight toward the bay where Kara had taken the cases last time. Ril checked her scanner with a glance and gave the faintest nod. She was ahead of us, somewhere deeper inside. We passed the bay. Empty crates stacked along the wall, a worker checking seals with half-lidded eyes. He didn't notice us. Kale turned down the corridor, keeping his steps steady. Ril followed, her gaze sweeping the walls. I kept a grin on my face in case anyone looked too closely. People always ignored someone who looked like they had no reason to care. At the end of the corridor, we stopped. A door stood half-closed, light spilling faintly from within. Voices carried through, low, even, calm. Kerr's voice. Deliver these first. The rest will follow tonight. Another voice, male, worker's tone. We don't have the storage capacity. Then make it, Kerr said flatly. Stack them if you have to. The ship won't wait. Kale's eyes met Ril's. She nodded once. He pushed the door open a fraction more. The room was larger than expected. Rows of crates lined the floor, some sealed, some open to reveal the glow of cores inside. Kerr stood near the center, day top hat in hand, checking each stack. The worker beside her scribbled notes without enthusiasm. Kale leaned closer to me, voice barely above a whisper. This is where she stores them. Not subtle, I whispered back. But efficient. Ril's eyes swept the room. She's logging them by section. Each crate grouped by handler origin. Kale frowned. So the rotation has more order than we thought. Kerr turned slightly, and for a moment I thought she'd spotted us. But she only adjusted her day top hat and moved to the next stack. We waited, pressed against the wall just outside, listening. The worker asked, what about the failed batch? Kerr didn't hesitate. Write them off. Blame the sealant. I'll take responsibility for the report. You'll be blamed, the worker said quietly. She gave a short laugh. I already was. Her tone carried no fear, no anger, just flat acceptance. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. Ril stayed silent. I whispered, she's tougher than she looks. Ril gave me a sharp glance. I raised my hands in mock surrender. Another worker entered, carrying a fresh case. From the Ridge cache. Tagged under Cache 2. Kerr scanned it, nodded, and pointed to the far stack. Place it there. Log it under the secondary line. Kale leaned closer to Ril. Secondary line. Different route, she whispered back. Parallel transfer. Kale's expression didn't shift, but his eyes darkened. Kerr continued her inspection. She moved with calm precision, marking each case, confirming each log. She didn't look rushed, though we knew she was under pressure. She moved like someone who had done this 100 times. After nearly 20 minutes, she finally stepped back. These will move at dusk. Prep the loaders. The workers nodded. She left the room without another word. Kale waited until her footsteps faded before slipping inside. Rill followed. I closed the door quietly behind us. The air was cooler here, humming with the faint glow of the cores. Rows of crates stood stacked to chest height, each marked with faint symbols. Rill moved to the nearest stack, running her scanner over the surface. Signal intact. Each case is live. These are ready for transfer. Kale crouched by another crate, checking the seams. Sealed properly. No sign of tampering. I leaned against one stack, grinning faintly. Looks like we found the treasure room. Rill shot me a look sharp enough to cut. Don't touch anything. I held up my hands. Wouldn't dream of it. We logged everything quickly. Rill marked each stack, noting handler origin, while Kale tracked the numbers. By the time we finished, the picture was clear. Kura had consolidated half a dozen caches into this single chamber. Rill lowered her scanner. This is the center point. All handlers route through her. Kale nodded once. She's the keystone. I grinned. Good thing we like watching her so much. Neither of them laughed. We slipped back into the corridor just before the next worker entered. No one noticed us. We returned to the bay, picked up a stray datapad, and walked out like we belonged. The guards at the door didn't even glance up. Outside, the canyon air hit sharp against my face. I laughed softly. And that's how you walk into the heart of the operation without anyone blinking. Rill ignored me. Kale didn't speak. We mounted our bikes and rode back toward camp. At base, Vex nearly dropped his cup when we laid out the logs. You got inside again. Kale set the datapad down. Storage chamber. Full consolidation. Transfer scheduled for dusk. Rill handed him the scanner. Marked by handler origin. Secondary line confirmed. Vex scrolled through the data, muttering. This is gold. We know exactly how she organizes it. We can intercept any of the stacks now. Tam frowned. Or we burn the whole chamber before the transfer. Rill shook her head. Not yet. We still need the route. Kale stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the map Vex pulled up. I stretched and grinned. See? Easy day. In and out, no one even noticed. I'm starting to think we're good at this. Rill gave me a flat look. We're lucky. Kale said nothing. Chapter 35, Watching the Transfer. We didn't rest much after returning. The data from the storage chamber had shifted everything, every handler, every cache, all converging into one room under Kura's command. The others kept discussing logistics, debating timing, routes, and contingencies. Me? I couldn't stop thinking about how casually we'd just walked in and out of their heart. Either we were brilliant, or their whole operation was a lot sloppier than they wanted to admit. Vex hunched over his console, fingers tapping non-stop. If they're moving at dusk, that gives us, he checked the time, muttering to himself, less than 8 hours. Not enough to set an intercept. We're not ready for that. Rill stood stiff, arms crossed, watching the map on the projection wall. Then we don't intercept. We observe. Kale said nothing, but he nodded once. His silence always carried weight, and when he did choose to speak, it came sharp. We follow her again. Tam grunted from the table. More sneaking around. That's what we do now. I leaned back on the bench, flashing a grin. Sneaking around is the fun part. You want to storm the front door? Be my guest. I'll watch from a safe distance. Tam gave me a glare, one I knew well by now. He wasn't amused. Rill wasn't either, but she never was. Kale, as usual, ignored me. Preparation was quiet but focused. Kale checked his gear 3 times. Ril loaded her scanner with fresh cells. I made sure my blaster was charged and holstered where I could grab it quickly. Even I wasn't careless about that. Fun was fun, but getting shot because of laziness wasn't my idea of a good laugh. By late afternoon, we were already moving. The canyon winds had picked up, carrying grit that scraped across armor plates and stung exposed skin. We kept the bikes low, hugging the ridge lines, stopping a click out from the station. From there, it was on foot. Kale led, crouched low, every movement calculated. Ril followed, her scanner muted but ready. I brought up the rear, doing my best not to kick stones down the slope, though once or twice I nearly did, and Kale shot me one of his looks. "What?" I whispered cheerfully. "Adds realism." Neither answered. Typical. From our perch above the station, we had a clear view of the pad. The 2 guards were there again, standing as lazy as ever. Their postures hadn't changed since morning. If they were paid by the hour, they weren't earning it. Inside, things were different. The hum of engines and clatter of equipment carried up faintly. Through the open doors, we could see the glow of lights deeper in, brighter than before. Kale adjusted his scope. "They're moving the cases." Ril shifted beside him, pressing her scanner against the rock. "Energy spike confirms. Loaders activated." I crouched close, peering down. "So, what's the over-under on how many crates she moves tonight? 10? 20? Do I hear 30? Kale didn't answer. Ril didn't even look at me. "Fine," I muttered. No gambling spirit in this group. It took nearly an hour before Kara appeared. She stepped out from the corridor, cloak tied back, day-top hat in hand. 2 workers followed with a loader droid between them, the cases stacked high. Kale's scope tracked her steadily. "She's leading. Direct control." Ril's tone was flat. "She won't leave the cases to anyone else." I smirked. "Control issues. I like her already." Kale ignored me. Kara directed the workers to set the stack near the pad. Another loader followed shortly after, then another. Within 20 minutes, the pad had 6 stacks of cases lined neatly in rows. The guards barely looked at them, focused outward instead of inward. "She's staging," Ril whispered. Kale adjusted his scope. "For the ship." Ril shook her head. "Not yet. This is consolidation. They won't risk the ship until everything is ready." Kale grunted in agreement. We kept watching. Every movement mattered. Kara oversaw each stack, checked every seal herself, and logged it on her day-top pad. The workers obeyed without question. I leaned closer to Kale and whispered, "She's like you. Bossing everyone around without cracking a smile." Kale didn't move. Ril muttered, "Don't compare them." I grinned. "I'm just saying, he could learn some tips. She's got presence." Kale's jaw flexed slightly, but he said nothing. By nightfall, the pad was filled. Nearly 20 cases, stacked and secured. Loader droids hummed quietly, their repulsor steady. Kale whispered, "That's the full cache." Ril's scanner flickered. "Energy confirms. No more cores inside." She moved everything out. Tam's voice crackled over the COMM from base. "You're seeing this?" Kale tapped his mic. "We see it. Looks like they're prepping for the handoff," Tam said. Ril replied, "Not tonight. The ship isn't here yet." "Then tomorrow," Tam muttered. "Which means you've got one night to decide what to do." I chimed in, cheerful. "Oh, no pressure at all. Just the fate of the galaxy stuffed into neat little boxes." "Be quiet," Tam snapped. I smiled to myself. Kara stayed on the pad until the last crate was logged. Then she dismissed the workers and stood alone for a moment, scanning the rows in silence. Even from this distance, I could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. Kale murmured, "She's carrying the weight." Rill said nothing. I tilted my head. She's not as cold as she pretends. Look at her. She knows if this goes wrong again, she's done. Rill gave me a sharp glance, but didn't argue. She turned back toward the station and disappeared inside. The guards remained, still scanning the canyon. Kale lowered his scope. "That's it for tonight." Rill packed her scanner. "She'll rest now. The ship comes tomorrow." I clapped Kale lightly on the shoulder. "See? Easy. We didn't even have to sneak in this time. Just sat here, breathed some dust, and watched her do all the work." Kale gave me a flat look. Rill rolled her eyes. "Fine," I said. "Tough crowd." We waited another hour, just to be sure. Nothing changed. The guards shifted once or twice, the loaders hummed quietly, and the canyon winds kept blowing. Finally, Kale signaled the retreat. We pulled back from the ridge, made the slow climb to our bikes, and rode quietly back to base. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Vex looked up from his console the moment we walked in. "Well?" Kale dropped onto the bench. 20 cases staged. Full cash. Transfer tomorrow." Rill set her scanner on the table. "All handlers consolidated. No reserves left." Vex rubbed his face with both hands. "Perfect. That means they'll risk everything on this one shipment. One clean move." Tam leaned forward. "So we strike tomorrow?" Kale didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the map, his thoughts hidden as always. Rill finally spoke. "We'll need more than a strike. We need to see the route. If we lose them after the pad, it's over." Vex muttered, "I can tag the loaders. Slip a tracer onto one before they lift." Tam shook his head. "Or we hit them before they leave the canyon." I stretched and grinned. "Or we just let Kale walk in, glare at them, and watch them surrender." Rill sighed audibly. Kale ignored me. Chapter 36, the night of the transfer. The camp felt tighter the next morning. No one said it outright, but the air was heavier, the kind of weight that came when everyone knew the next move couldn't be walked back. Vex muttered to himself over his console, lines of code flickering across his screen. Tam polished his blaster for the third time, more out of habit than need. Kale sat on the bench, silent, cleaning his carbine with slow, steady movements. Rill stood at the map display, her eyes locked on the canyon routes. I leaned against the wall, grinning faintly. Cheerful crowd today. You'd think someone died. Tam gave me a glare sharp enough to cut. Rill didn't react. Kale didn't even look up. Vex just groaned. "Don't start," Vex muttered. "Not today." Fine, fine," I said, raising my hands. "I'll save my charm for the guards at the station. They look like they could use a laugh." "Or you'll get us shot," Tam snapped. "Details," I said cheerfully. Rill finally spoke. Her tone was calm, even, but it carried the weight of decision. "We go in during the transfer. If we wait until after, we lose the chance to see where the cases move next." Kale nodded once. "We shadow her inside." Vex swiveled in his chair, frowning. "You realize how insane that sounds? They'll be on high alert during the transfer. Guards, loaders, Kara herself. One wrong step." "Then we don't make a wrong step," Kale said simply. I clapped Vex on the shoulder. "Relax. We're professionals." "Well, they are. I'm here for entertainment value." Vex swatted my hand away, scowling. You're going to get someone killed one day. My grin didn't fade, but my tone dropped a shade. Not anyone I care about. For once, no one had a comeback. The hours crawled. We spent them prepping gear, triple-checking routes, running through every angle. Kale adjusted his carbine straps again and again. Rill sat with her scanner in her lap, eyes distant but focused. Tam argued with Vex twice about contingencies, and I, naturally, tried to lighten the mood until Rill finally told me to shut up. By dusk, we were moving. The canyon sky burned orange before fading into blue, then black. The wind had died down, leaving the air sharp and still. We parked the bikes a click out again, covering them with cloths, and began the walk. The closer we came, the clearer the sounds of the station grew. Engines hummed, loader droids clanked against the pad, voices carried faintly through the dark. The glow of floodlights lit the entire exterior, casting sharp shadows against the canyon walls. Kale crouched low at the ridge. He raised his scope, scanned, then passed it to Rill. Guards doubled. 4 at the entrance now. Rill adjusted the focus, her voice calm. 2 workers on the pad. Ker's there. Directing. I leaned close, peering over her shoulder. She looks good under pressure. Graceful, even. Rill didn't react. Kale didn't even acknowledge me. Fine, I muttered. Tough crowd. We slipped down the ridge carefully, hugging the shadows. Every step was deliberate. Kale moved first, Rill behind him, me bringing up the rear. The guards at the entrance scanned outward, their helmets turning slowly, but they never looked toward the slope we crept along. Kale whispered into the COMM. Entry point. East vent. Rill tapped her scanner. Clear. No energy spike inside. We reached the vent unnoticed. Kale pried the grate loose with steady hands, set it aside, and slipped inside first. Rill followed without hesitation. I squeezed in last, muttering under my breath. Cramped, I whispered. This is why I hate vents. No room to stretch. Be quiet, Rill said flatly. See? No appreciation for my suffering. Kale's silence was answer enough. The vent carried us deep into the station. The hum of the mast echoed through the metal, steady and low. At one junction, we paused, listening as voices passed beneath. Crate 9 sealed. Ready for loading. Verification logged. Ship inbound in 2 hours. Kale's eyes met Rill's. She nodded once. We continued. We emerged in a dark maintenance corridor. Kale checked the corners, then signaled us forward. Rill pulled her scanner again, reading faint pulses through the wall. Cases moving, she whispered. Loader droids are active. Kale led us down the corridor until we reached a narrow service hatch. Through the slats, we could see the main floor brightly lit, crowded with crates, workers, and droids. Kara stood at the center, data pad in hand, her voice clear even over the noise. Stack them by column. Log by handler origin. Double-check the seals before transfer. No mistakes this time. The workers obeyed quickly. She moved among them with calm authority, scanning each case herself. Kale whispered, she's in charge. Rill's eyes narrowed. Always. I leaned close, keeping my voice soft. She really does remind me of you too. Cold eyes, no jokes, just business. You'd get along. Rill gave me a glare that could cut stone. Kale ignored me. Again. We stayed there for nearly an hour, watching. Every crate was checked, logged, and stacked. Loader droids lifted them onto repulsor sleds, forming neat columns near the pad doors. The guards moved constantly, pacing, scanning, alert now in a way they hadn't been before. Kale whispered, "Security's tightened." Rill nodded. "Because the ship is close." I tilted my head. "Or maybe they heard about us and just don't know it yet." Neither responded. Kara paused at one stack, scanning the seal. She frowned slightly, called a worker over, and ordered the case resealed. She stood there until it was done, then marked it with her data pad and moved on. "Nothing escapes her," Rill murmured. "Good for them," I whispered. "Bad for us." Kale didn't disagree. Finally, the last crate was logged. Kara stood at the center again, her eyes sweeping the rows. "Ready for transfer. Hold until the signal." The workers nodded. The loaders powered down, their hum fading into silence. Kale leaned close to us. "She's waiting for the ship." Rill checked her scanner. 2 hours. Maybe less. I whispered cheerfully, "Perfect. Plenty of time for us to sit here, breathe dust, and not get caught." Rill glared again. Kale stayed silent. We pulled back from the hatch after another 10 minutes, slipping quietly into the maintenance corridor again. Kale led us back toward the vent, every step measured. Rill kept her scanner low, sweeping for energy spikes. I hummed softly under my breath until Kale gave me a look that shut me up instantly. Some moments weren't for jokes. Back at the ridge, the floodlights burned brighter, cutting through the dark. The guards hadn't moved. The crates sat ready, lined and stacked like soldiers waiting for orders. Kale lowered his scope. "We've seen enough." Rill nodded. "The ship will take them tomorrow." Tam's voice crackled through the COMM. "Report." Kale said simply, "Transfer prepped. Kara leads. Tomorrow is the move." There was silence on the other end. Then Tam muttered, "Then tomorrow decides it." I grinned faintly, stretching my arms. "See? We lived. No one even broke a sweat." "You're welcome." Rill rolled her eyes. Kale ignored me. Chapter 37, The Arrival. We didn't bother sleeping much. Everyone knew tomorrow wasn't just another watch and log job, it was the moment we'd see how the chain above Kara really worked. Whether the stolen ship landed smoothly, whether she passed the crates directly, whether anyone higher showed their face, we had to be there to see it. Vex barely left his console. He ran checks on every COMM loop, burned through 3 ration packs without realizing it, and muttered at his screens like they were enemies he could outsmart. Tam cleaned his rifle until the metal shone, then checked it again anyway. Kale sat quiet at the edge of the table, eyes closed, resting but not asleep. Rill stood near the map the whole time, arms folded, watching the hollow signal pulses in silence. I leaned back in my chair, balancing on 2 legs, grinning. "You know, I've seen funerals with more laughter than this room. Somebody tell a joke before I die of boredom." Tam didn't look up. "Then die quietly." Vex groaned. "Ignore him. He thinks he's funny." "I don't think," I said brightly. "I know." Rill cut in, voice even as stone. "Save it for later." That shut me up at least for a few minutes. Dawn broke sharp and cold. We moved early, packing light again. Kale checked the straps on his carbine, Rill set her scanner to passive mode, and I, for once, kept my grin small. It wasn't nerves, I just knew today mattered more than the last dozen nights combined. We rode the bikes out to the same ridge, parking them under cloths. From there, it was a crawl. Kale led, steady as ever. Rill followed with her scanner close. I stayed behind, careful not to let a single stone clatter. Even I could be serious when the stakes were high. The ridge gave us the view we needed. The pad was already awake. Floodlights burned bright against the dawn haze. Guards patrolled in pairs this time, not just standing around bored. The crates were lined neatly in rows, stacked and sealed, waiting for the signal. Kara stood at the front, cloak drawn tight, day top hat in hand. She didn't pace. She didn't fidget. She just watched. Kale lowered his scope. She's ready. Ril's eyes stayed on her scanner. The ship isn't here yet. Engines not in range. I leaned against the rock, grinning faintly. So we wait. My favorite part. Hours of doing nothing. Kale gave me a look. I held up my hands. All right, all right. I'll keep my mouth shut. Mostly. We waited. The guards shifted, pacing slow but steady. Workers milled about, checking straps and seals, but they moved carefully, glancing often at Kara for confirmation. She didn't say much, just a nod here, a short word there. They obeyed without question. Ril spoke quietly. They trust her. Kale nodded once. Because they have no choice. I leaned closer. Or maybe she's just that charming. Neither responded. Figures. The hours dragged, but finally, the air changed. Ril lifted her scanner. Energy spike. Engines. Approaching from upper atmosphere. Kale raised his scope, scanning the sky. There. I followed his gaze. At first it was just a speck against the blue, but then the outline sharpened. A transport vessel, hull scuffed, markings stripped, engines burning steady. It descended slow, cautious, angling toward the canyon pad. Vex's voice crackled in our ears from base. That's the stolen registry. Theta 7-4. Exactly what we pulled from the comms. Confirmed, Kale said simply. The ship descended lower, repulsors kicking up dust in heavy waves. The guards snapped to full alert, rifles lifted. The workers pulled back from the crates. Kara didn't move. She stood at the front, calm, eyes on the ship as if daring it to falter. The transport landed heavy, its repulsors whining against the canyon floor. Dust billowed out, cloaking the pad for a moment before settling. The ramp lowered with a groan of hydraulics. 3 figures stepped out. Armed, armored, but not uniformed. Freelancers, like the others, gear stripped of markings, movement sufficient. They didn't speak at first. They just scanned the pad, checked the crates, checked the guards. Then another figure emerged. Taller, older, his posture sharp despite the weight of his armor. He didn't wear a helmet. His face was lined, his eyes cold. Ril whispered, "He's in charge." Kale's jaw tightened. I muttered, "Looks like someone's grandfather got lost on the wrong job." No one laughed. Kara stepped forward, day top hat in hand. Shipment ready. Verified and logged. The older man studied her for a moment before answering. You were late. Her voice was steady. Circumstances beyond control. The product is intact. He glanced at the crates, then nodded once. Begin transfer. The freelancers moved quickly, bringing loader droids from the ship. They began shifting the crates in neat lines up the ramp. The workers from the station assisted, under Kara's direction. She oversaw each move, scanning the seals again, confirming every load before letting it go. Kale whispered, "Direct handoff. No middleman." Ril's eyes narrowed. Because they can't risk another failure. We watched as crate after crate disappeared into the transport's hold. The process was slow, methodical. Kara never left the pad, her eyes sharp, her voice calm. The older man stood near the ramp, watching both her and the crates with equal intensity. I whispered, "Think they're married." Ril shot me a glare that could kill. Kale didn't even blink. "Fine," I muttered. "Just trying to lighten the mood." Halfway through, one of the guards called out. A crate seal had flickered, a faint glow. Kara strode over immediately, scanned it, and barked an order to reseal. She stood there until it was done, then handed it over herself. The older man watched the whole time, saying nothing, but his eyes never left her. She's proving herself, Rill whispered. Kale's voice was low. Or being tested. Finally, the last crate was loaded. The workers stepped back. The loaders powered down. The older man approached Kara directly. You did well. This time. She didn't flinch. There won't be another failure. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. See that there isn't. He turned and boarded the transport. The ramp rose, the engines roared, and the ship lifted slowly into the air. Dust swirled again, choking the pad. The guards held position until the vessel vanished into the sky. Only then did Kara lower her data pad. She exhaled once, briefly, then turned and walked back inside. Kale lowered his scope. We have what we need. Rill closed her scanner. Direct handoff. No intermediaries. The chain leads to him. Tam's voice crackled over comms. And the ship's gone. Vex followed, sharper. I've got its vector. It's heading for the rim lane. I can trace it further. Do it, Kale said. I leaned back against the rock, finally grinning again. See? No one died. We watched, we learned, and I got dust in my teeth. Another successful outing. Rill rolled her eyes. Kale didn't answer. We pulled back from the ridge after another hour, making sure the pad settled. The guards returned to their board posture, the workers dispersed, and the canyon grew quiet again. By the time we reached the bikes, night had fallen fully. The ride back was silent. Not because I wasn't tempted to talk, but because I could feel how heavy it all sat on the others. For once, even I kept my mouth shut. Back at base, Vex already had the vector mapped. The ship's trail stretched out along the rim, hopping toward an unknown endpoint. It's moving steady, Vex muttered. Not fast. Not trying to hide, but not broadcasting either. It knows it's safe. Rill crossed her arms. Safe for now. Kale leaned over the map. Where's the intercept? Vex shook his head. Not yet. Give me time. Tam frowned. And what about Kara? She's still alive, still running this side. Kale said simply, we keep watching her. I grinned. Good. I was starting to miss her already. Rill gave me a sharp look. Kale ignored me. Chapter 38, after the handoff. The ship was gone, nothing left but faint dust clouds settling across the canyon floor. The guards relaxed again, shoulders loosening, rifles dipping slightly, as if the weight of responsibility had lifted the moment the vessel cleared atmosphere. The workers drifted back inside, no longer moving with the precision they had under Kara's eye. Kara herself didn't linger. After the ship disappeared, she gave one last look at the empty pad, then turned and walked straight into the station. No hesitation, no backward glance. Kale lowered his scope. She's going back inside. Rill checked her scanner. No signal spike. She's not heading toward the COMM mast. I leaned over Kale's shoulder, grinning faintly. Maybe she's just going to bed. Even smug couriers need a nap after a long day of impressing scary old men. Rill gave me her usual sharp look. Kale ignored me, of course. Fine, I muttered cheerfully. I'll keep my insights to myself. For now. We stayed on the ridge another hour, watching the station settle back into its routine. The guards returned to their posts, bored again. The workers stacked empty loaders against the wall. Nothing unusual at least, not until the second hour. Ril's scanner flickered. She leaned forward. Movement. Kura's speeder. Powering up. Kale raised the scope instantly. Confirmed. She's leaving. Sure enough, the faint glow of a speeder core lit up in the canyon. Kura rolled out from the station gate, cloak drawn close, no escort with her. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just angled her bike east and accelerated. I grinned. And the game continues. Ril gave me a sideways glance. This isn't a game. Everything's a game if you're good at it, I said lightly. Kale's voice cut through, low and steady. Stay focused. That tone left no room for more jokes. I quieted down. We moved fast. Our bikes were waiting a click out, covered and ready. Kale yanked the cloth off his, swung into the saddle, and powered it up with practiced ease. Ril was right behind him, her scanner clipped to her side. I kicked mine alive and let the engine hum, grinning despite myself. Kale's voice came over comms, calm and clipped. We keep distance. No closer than 500 meters. Ril added, she knows the canyon routes better than us. If she even suspects a tail, we'll lose her. I tapped my COMM. Relax. I'll behave. This time. Tam's voice crackled faintly from base. Try harder than last time. I smirked. You wound me. The chase stretched long. Kura kept a steady pace, neither rushing nor slowing. Her posture on the bike was relaxed, confident, like she knew exactly where she was going and didn't need to second-guess it. Kale's bike hummed quietly ahead of mine. His eyes never left the signal tracker strapped to his wrist. Ril's scanner pulsed occasionally, confirming the distance. I let my grin slip back as the wind whipped across my face. For all the tension, I couldn't deny the thrill of it shadowing a courier through canyons under starlight, every move measured, every hum of the engine sharp in the night. But beneath the thrill, the weight pressed. If she caught us, if she realized we were too close, everything could unravel. That thought kept my grin from widening too far. 2 hours into the shadow, she finally slowed. Her speeder angled toward a cliff shelf and stopped beside a rock outcropping. She dismounted calmly, pulling a case from her saddlebag. She set it down carefully, almost casually, then tapped her data pad. Kale slowed us to a crawl. We parked behind a ridge out of sight, engines cut. We crawled to the lip and peered over. Kura stood alone, scanning the case with her data pad. Her face was calm, composed, but her shoulders carried tension now that hadn't been visible on the pad. Ril whispered, she's making a call. Kale adjusted his scope. No visible comms. Must be on the data pad. I grinned faintly. Secret conversations in the middle of nowhere. Romantic. Ril glared. I raised my hands, whispering, fine. Not romantic. Suspicious. Her voice carried faintly through the canyon air, just enough for us to hear pieces when the wind shifted. Transfer complete, crates delivered, no interference. She paused, listening. Yes, confirmed. They were satisfied. Another pause. Her head tilted slightly. I'll continue rotation. New caches in progress. Then silence. She tapped the data pad again, slid it back into her cloak, and lifted the case. She strapped it back onto the speeder and mounted calmly, her posture back to its composed form. She accelerated east without looking back. Kale's eyes stayed on her until she vanished into the canyon. Only then did he lower the scope. She reported. Ril nodded. To someone higher. I leaned back, grinning faintly. So she has bosses too. Makes her almost human. Neither responded. Figures. We shadowed her for another 3 hours, through ridge cuts and canyon forks, until the tracker showed her returning to the same station. She rode straight through the gates without pause. The guards waved her in like she was invisible. Kale slowed his bike, parking us in the shadows again. He watched the tracker until it went still inside. "She's done for the night," he said. Ril closed her scanner. "She'll rest now. Tomorrow she begins the next rotation." I grinned. "Which means we get to watch her some more. I'm starting to think she likes the attention." Ril rolled her eyes. Kale ignored me. Back at camp, the air was tense but alive with quiet energy. Vex nearly fell out of his chair when we told him. "She actually called someone out there? In the open?" Kale dropped onto the bench. "Yes." Ril handed him the scanner. Logged position, duration, and daytop had signal strength. Vex muttered, typing furiously. "Give me a day and I'll break the log trail. If she pinged anyone off-world, I'll know." Tam crossed his arms. "And if she didn't?" "Then she used her relay," Vex said. "Which means we trace the relay instead." Kale leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Either way, the line leads up." I grinned. "See? She's useful. More fun to watch than Vex screens, anyway." "Shut up," Vex muttered. Chapter 39, Catching the Line. The camp had settled into its usual rhythm after we returned, but no one relaxed. Vex sat hunched over the console, screens glowing across his face as he muttered at streams of code. Tam paced the length of the room with his rifle slung, boots scuffing against the floor. Ril leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the map projection. Kale sat near the edge of the table, silent, eyes closed as if resting, though I knew better. I sprawled on the bench, one leg kicked up, grinning. "You know, we're spending a lot of time watching one woman make phone calls. Maybe we should just ask her to dinner. Save the effort." Tam stopped pacing, glaring. "Shut up." Ril didn't look at me. "Focus." Vex groaned. "Do you ever stop talking?" "Not unless you pay me," I said cheerfully. Kale opened his eyes. "Enough." That tone clipped through the room. Silence settled again. Even I didn't push further. The plan was simple, at least on the surface. We'd wait for Kura to make another remote call like the one on the canyon shelf, but this time Vex would intercept it directly, letting us hear the voice on the other end. The trick was catching the signal without tripping any alarms. Vex spun his chair around to face us, his hair sticking up from running his hands through it too many times. "I can set the intercept up. But it's not perfect. I'll need you two." He nodded at Kale and Ril to get me as close as possible. "If she routes through a hidden relay again, the signal will bounce. I can mask it once, maybe twice, but any longer and she'll know someone's listening." Ril's voice was calm. "Then we only need once." Kale nodded. "We follow her until she makes the call. You do the rest." I clapped Vex on the shoulder. "See? No pressure at all. Just don't screw up." Vex shoved my hand away. "You're unbearable." "Admit it," I said with a grin. "You'd miss me if I were gone." Tam muttered, "Not likely." We didn't wait long. By the next evening, Kura's speeder left the station again. She rode steady, cloak drawn close, her posture sharp. No escort, no hesitation, same as before. Kale led us out immediately. Our bikes hummed low against the canyon floor, engines muffled. Ril kept her scanner tight to her chest, eyes scanning every flicker. I hung back just enough to avoid throwing dust into their faces, though I couldn't resist the grin as the wind whipped past me. Kale's voice came over COMM, steady. 500 meters. No closer. Copy, Ril said. I chimed in cheerfully. And here I was ready to give her a friendly wave. Don't, Kale said flatly. Fine, I muttered. Tough crowd. 2 hours later, she slowed again. This time, she pulled onto a narrow ledge overlooking a canyon split. She dismounted calmly, pulled the same day top hat from her cloak, and tapped it alive. Kale raised a hand, signaling us to halt. We cut our engines and slipped off the bikes, moving low along the ridge until we had a clear view. Kara stood with her back to the canyon wall, day top hat glowing faintly against her cloak. She set a case at her feet, rested one hand on it, and began speaking in low tones. Vex's voice crackled faintly in our ears from camp. Signal detected. Give me a second, there. Locked in. You're about to hear what she hears. The speakers in our earpieces hissed, then steadied. A male voice came through older, sharp, clipped. Report. Kerr's voice followed, calm and clear. Shipment delivered. Transfer complete. No interference. The man asked, the ship. Departed without issue, she said. Crates logged. Handlers rotated. Caches consolidated. There was a pause. Then the man asked, and the failure? Kerr's tone didn't change. Contained. Sealed. No evidence remains. The man's voice hardened. See that it never happens again. Yes, she said simply. Vex's whisper hissed through comms. Hold steady. I'm pulling his ID signature. Just a few more seconds. Kale's jaw tightened. Hurry. Ril's eyes stayed fixed on Kara. She's ending the call. Sure enough, Kara lowered the day top pad slightly, her finger hovering over the pad. Vex muttered, almost come on, come on. The man's voice cut in one last time. New orders will follow. Await relay at designated hour. Then the line went dead. Kara slid the day top pad back into her cloak, lifted the case, and mounted her speeder. She accelerated away without looking back. Kale exhaled slowly. Did you get it? Vex's voice came sharp. Partial. I've got fragments of his ID enough to know he's not on that ship. He's off-world, routing through at least 3 relays. But I can trace further if she calls again. Ril's eyes narrowed. Not local, then. Higher. Tam's voice crackled in. So we know the obvious. Someone's pulling strings from off-world. What does that give us? Kale said simply, a target. I leaned against the rock, grinning faintly. See? Worth the trip. We got a voice, a grumpy old man, and Vex nearly blew a fuse trying to catch him. Shut up, Vex muttered. We shadowed Kara all the way back to the station. She parked inside the gate again, the guards waving her through without hesitation. The tracker on Kale's wrist dimmed as she disappeared into the structure. Kale lowered his arm. She's done for tonight. Ril packed her scanner. She'll wait for the relay. I swung onto my bike with a grin. Good. Gives us a chance to stretch before the next round of sitting and waiting. Neither replied. Figures. Back at camp, Vex was already deep in the data. He had 3 screens alive, lines of code spilling across all of them. He muttered non-stop, half curses, half calculations. When we entered, he didn't look up. Kale set his rifle down. Results. Vex groaned. Partial relay trace. The ID fragment points to the mid-rim. Could be a base, could be a relay station. Too vague to pin down yet. Ril leaned over his shoulder. You'll need the next call. Yes, Vex muttered. If she pings him again, I can stitch the fragments together. Tam frowned. And if she doesn't? Then we wait for orders to come down instead, Vex said. I leaned over Vex's other shoulder, grinning. Translation: we're stuck babysitting again. Vex shoved me off. Go away. The room fell quiet again, the weight settling. Everyone was thinking the same thing: how long before the next call, and what it might reveal. Kale finally spoke, his voice steady. We keep shadowing. Until the chain above her shows itself. Rill nodded once. I stretched out on the bench, smirking faintly. Good thing we're patient people. Rill shot me a look. You're not. True, I admitted cheerfully. But I fake it well. Chapter 40, Holding the Line. The camp was quiet, too quiet. Even Vex had stopped muttering at his console, which almost made me more nervous than when he was rattling off curses about code. The only sounds were the hum of the generators and the faint tapping of Tam's boots as he paced the floor. Kale sat at the table, arms folded, staring at nothing. Rill stood near the map display again, her scanner in hand, scrolling through the last set of logs. I sprawled on the bench with my boots up, grinning faintly. Someone had to break the silence. You know, I said cheerfully, I think we're making progress. We're practically Kura's biggest fans at this point. Follow her everywhere, listen to all her calls, admire her work ethic. Tam shot me a look sharp enough to cut steel. You think this is funny? Yes, I said simply. Otherwise, it'd be boring. And we can't have that. Vex groaned from the console. I can't work like this. Kale's voice cut across the room, low but firm. Focus. That tone snapped everyone back into place. Even I quieted down. For a moment. The plan was the same, wait for Kura to make another call. Vex would intercept again, this time with his system primed to grab more than just fragments. The trick, as always, was patience. Rill spoke quietly without looking up from her scanner. She won't wait long. Orders are expected. She said so herself. Kale nodded once. Tam leaned against the wall, arms crossed. And if she changes the relay? Then we adjust, Kale said simply. I smirked. You really enjoy saying as little as possible, don't you? Kale didn't answer. Rill gave me a sharp glance. I held up my hands. Fine. Just saying. By dusk, Kura left the station again. Her speeder rolled smoothly across the canyon floor, cloak pulled close, posture sharp. No escort again. That told us everything we needed to know about her confidence or arrogance. We moved fast. Bikes humming low, dust trailing faintly, we kept distance. Kale's wrist tracker pulsed steadily, Rill's scanner flickering every few minutes. I hung back just enough, grinning as the wind tore past. Kale's voice over COMM, hold at 500 meters. Copy, Rill said. Understood, I said brightly. Wouldn't want to ruin the date by showing up too early. Shut up, Tam muttered in my ear from base. Rude, I said cheerfully. This time, she didn't stop at a canyon shelf. Instead, she veered into a deep ravine, winding between jagged stone until she came to a narrow hollow. She dismounted, set a case down at her feet, and pulled the day top hat from her cloak. Kale slowed us to a crawl. We parked behind an outcrop, engines off. We crept up the slope until we had a view. Kura stood alone again, day top hat glowing faintly. Her face was calm, but her shoulders carried weight. She tapped the pad, waited a moment, then began speaking in low tones. Vex's voice came in sharp over comms. Signal locked. This time I've got her channel pinned. You're about to hear everything. The speakers hissed, then steadied. The same older male voice cut through sharp, clipped, cold. Status. Kura's voice was steady. Transfer completed. Crates delivered. No issues. The man asked, and the handlers. Rotating as ordered, she said. Secondary caches stripped. New assembly in progress. He was silent for a moment. Then, and the failure. Buried, she said simply. No trace remains. His voice hardened. See that it stays buried. You've already drawn attention. Kura didn't flinch. It's contained. Vex's voice whispered urgently in our ears. Hold steady. I'm pulling the relay origin. This is better than last time. Kale's eyes stayed locked on Kura. How long? 30 seconds. Maybe less. Don't let her cut it off. Ril whispered, she's listening again. Sure enough, Kura tilted her head slightly, waiting for the man's next words. New orders will follow shortly, the man said. Prepare for additional shipments. Priority increased. Kura asked, from where? That is not your concern, the man snapped. Understood, she said calmly. Vex hissed. Almost there. 10 more seconds, don't let her. But the line crackled suddenly. A third voice cut in smooth, male, younger. Line compromised. The older man's voice sharpened. Cut it. The channel went dead instantly. Kura frowned at her day top hat, tapped it once, then slid it back into her cloak. She picked up the case, mounted her speeder, and rode off without a glance around. Kale exhaled slowly. Did you get it? Vex's voice came quick, sharp. Yes. Partial trace to the mid-rim, narrowed further than before. But they felt me. Someone on their end knew I was listening. Ril's eyes narrowed. How much risk? Medium, Vex admitted. They don't know who or where. Yet. Tam's voice came over flat. So we just told them someone's watching. Kale said calmly, they already suspected. I leaned back against the rock, grinning faintly. On the bright side, now they know Vex exists. Maybe they'll send him fan mail. Shut up, Vex snapped. We shadowed Kura all the way back to the station again. Same pattern, guards waving her through without question, tracker dimming as she disappeared inside. Kale lowered his arm. She's in for the night. Ril packed her scanner. Orders will follow soon. We'll need to be ready. I swung onto my bike, grinning. Perfect. Another thrilling day of chasing couriers and listening to cranky old men shout. Living the dream. No one answered me. Typical. Back at camp, Vex was already deep into the relay trace. He had half a dozen screens open, lines of code spilling non-stop. He muttered, cursed, typed faster. Kale set his carbine down. Report. Mid-rim confirmed, Vex said quickly. Somewhere between Jinden and Ord Mantell. I can't narrow further without another call, but it's enough to know the chain runs higher than this planet. Ril leaned over his shoulder. And the third voice. Whoever monitors the relays, Vex said. Young, fast, sharp. Not the same as her superior. Someone technical. That's how they caught me. Tam frowned. So there's more than one layer above her. Yes, Vex said. Kale's voice was steady. Then we keep pulling. I grinned, leaning on the console. Look at us, climbing the ladder. One grumpy boss at a time. Ril gave me a sharp look. Kale ignored me. Chapter 41, waiting for the slip. The night after the relay trace, the camp felt even heavier. Vex hadn't moved from the console since the last call, his eyes bloodshot, his hands twitching over the keys. Tam checked his rifle again and again, muttering under his breath about wasting time. Kale leaned against the table, silent as always, but sharper in his stillness. Rill stood at the map display, her scanner in hand, reviewing the same logs she'd already studied twice. I lounged on the bench, arms behind my head, grinning faintly. Someone had to break the silence. You know, if we're going to keep listening to Kara talk to her bosses, we should at least ask her to spice it up. Maybe sing. Or tell bedtime stories. Would make all this more entertaining. Tam glared. You think this is a game? Yes, I said cheerfully. Otherwise, it's just endless waiting and staring at screens. And you don't want me bored? Vex groaned, rubbing his face. Maker, why do you never shut up? Because you'd miss me if I did, I said with a grin. Kale's voice cut across, steady and low. Enough. That tone shut us all up. Even me. The plan hadn't changed. We needed another call. Vex swore he could grab a full trace this time if we just gave him a little longer. Rill believed him. Kale didn't question it. Tam, of course, hated waiting, but even he didn't argue. Rill spoke calmly, eyes still on her scanner. She'll make contact again soon. They promised new orders. Kale nodded once. Tam muttered, and we'll be sitting on our hands until she does. Not sitting, Kale said. Watching. I smirked. You're very good at one-word answers. You know that. He didn't respond. Rill gave me her usual sharp glance. I raised my hands. Fine. Just trying to keep morale high. By late afternoon, the tracker on Kale's wrist pulsed. Kara's speeder was leaving the station again. She rode steady, her posture sharp, her movements calm. No escort. No hesitation. We were on our bikes in seconds. Engines low, dust trails faint, we kept the same careful distance. Kale set the pace, Rill close behind him, me bringing up the rear with a grin as the canyon wind hit my face. Kale's voice over COMM, 500 meters. Hold. Rill replied, copy. I chimed in cheerfully, 500 it is. Close enough to watch, far enough not to smell her cloak. Perfect. Shut up, Tam muttered from base. I laughed quietly. This time, Kara rode longer than before. Hours stretched as we shadowed her through winding canyons and ridge paths. She didn't stop until the sky had gone dark, the stars bright overhead. Finally, she slowed and pulled onto a flat shelf overlooking a wide valley. She dismounted, pulled a case from her saddlebag, and lit her day top hat. Kale signaled us down. We cut our engines, slid off the bikes, and crept up the slope until we had a clear view. Kara stood alone, day top hat glowing against her cloak. Her face was calm, her movements precise. She tapped the pad, waited, then began speaking in low tones. Vex's voice came through COMM, sharp with focus. Signal locked. I've got her this time. Everyone keep quiet. The speakers in our ears hissed, then steadied. The same older male voice cut through cold, clipped. Report. Kara's voice followed, steady. Transfer completed. Crates delivered. Handlers rotated. Caches stripped. Any complications? No, she said simply. The man paused. Then, new orders. Additional shipments will move through your route. You will prepare. Kara asked, from where? That is not your concern, the man snapped again. Understood, she said calmly. Vex whispered fast in our ears. Hold steady. I'm pulling the relay. Just need more time. Kale's jaw tightened. How long? 30 seconds. Ril's eyes stayed on Kura. She's listening again. The man's voice returned. Security has increased. You will be watched more closely. Do not fail again. Kura's tone didn't change. I won't. Then the younger voice cut in again, smooth, sharp. Signal integrity compromised. Possible trace. Vex hissed. Damn it, hold, just a few more seconds. The older man barked, cut it. But Kura spoke quickly before the line dropped. Confirm cache locations. The channel sputtered, static filling our ears, but one word slipped through in the older man's voice. Mantel. Then silence. The line was dead. Kura frowned at her data pad, tapped it once, then slid it back into her cloak. She mounted her speeder, accelerated, and vanished into the canyon without looking back. Kale lowered his scope. Mantel. Ril nodded. Ord Mantel. That's the next line. Vex's voice came, sharp with triumph. Got it. Full trace this time. The relay ties directly to Ord Mantel. That's where her orders are coming from. Tam's voice crackled in, flat. So now we know where the chain leads. Kale said simply, yes. I leaned back against the rock, grinning faintly. See? Worth the wait. And all we had to do was listen to cranky old men bark orders until they slipped up. Ril gave me a sharp look. Kale ignored me. We shadowed Kura back to the station again. Same pattern, same routine. Guards waved her in, tracker dimmed, she vanished inside. Kale lowered his arm. She's in. Ril packed her scanner. She'll wait for the next relay now. I swung onto my bike with a grin. And we'll be right here, waiting for her bedtime call. Honestly, I feel like part of her family at this point. Ril rolled her eyes. Kale didn't respond. Back at camp, Vex was nearly bouncing in his chair. Ord Mantel. This is it. That's the hub. That's where the orders come from. Kale leaned over the map. Show me. Vex pulled it up, lines of code translated into a route, a star lane stretching from the mid-rim into the station network. See? This is clean. No more fragments, no more guesses. Direct origin trace. Ril studied the projection. Mantel's a major hub. Smugglers, mercenaries, freelancers. Easy to hide. Tam crossed his arms. And dangerous. If we follow this line, we'll be walking into a nest. I smirked. Sounds fun. When do we leave? Vex groaned. Maker save me. Chapter 42, Toward Mantel. The camp was buzzing with something it hadn't had in weeks. Direction. The moment Vex announced the trace had landed on Ord Mantel, the whole place shifted. Tam stopped pacing. Ril lowered her scanner. Even Kale leaned closer to the map instead of sitting in silence. Vex jabbed a finger at the glowing star lane on the projection. There. Ord Mantel. That's where the signal originated. No fragments this time. No guesses. Clean trace. Ril studied the projection carefully, her voice even. Mantel's busy. Layers of smugglers, mercenaries, traitors. Easy to disappear. Harder to pull someone out. Kale asked, how soon? Vex hesitated. Soon, but not immediate. You need preparation. Mantel's not like this canyon, there are eyes everywhere. If you step in sloppy, you'll vanish before you find anything. Tam muttered, which is exactly why this is a mistake. I leaned back on the bench, grinning faintly. Relax, Tam. Think of it as a vacation. Scenic views, new people, possibly a fight or two. What's not to like? Tam glared at me. You're unbearable. Thank you, I said brightly. Ril turned away from the map, her gaze sharp. Kura will receive Mantel's orders soon. If we don't leave before then, we lose the trail. Kale nodded once. Then we leave. Tam frowned. Just like that? No backup, no plan. Kale's voice was steady. The plan is to follow. Nothing more. Vex groaned. You all are going to make me old before my time. I clapped him on the shoulder. Relax. We'll bring you a souvenir. Maybe a data core. Something to remind you of us while you sit here alone. Shut up, he muttered. Preparation started immediately. Kale checked every strap on his carbine, then stripped it down and cleaned it again just to be sure. Ril packed her scanner with fresh cells, her hands precise as always. Tam loaded spare charge packs into his belt with a scowl that didn't fade. I checked my blaster, spun it once, and holstered it with a grin. See? Ready already. You all take too long. Ril gave me a sharp glance. You take nothing seriously. That's not true, I said cheerfully. I take meals and naps very seriously. Kale ignored us both. The hours dragged until dusk. None of us spoke much, though I did my best to lighten the air with commentary that only made Tam scowl more. By the time the canyon shadows stretched long, Kale finally stood and said, "We go now." Ril nodded once. Tam muttered under his breath. Vex waved us off with a sigh. Don't get yourselves killed. I'll keep the relay net hot in case anything pings. I grinned. Don't miss me too much. Not possible, Vex said flatly. We rode the bikes out into the canyon, engines low. The wind was sharp, the sky dimming to night. The tracker on Kale's wrist pulsed faintly, Kura's speeder moving steady along the ridge roots. She hadn't left the planet yet, but she would soon. Kale led, as always. Ril stayed close behind, her scanner flickering occasionally. I followed last, my grin wide as the wind hit my face. For all the tension, I couldn't help enjoying the ride. Kale's voice over COMM, 2 clicks out. She's heading north. Ril replied, toward the rim lanes. I chimed in cheerfully, field trip. Tam's voice crackled from base. You'll get yourselves killed out there. I smirked. If we do, you can have my blaster. It's shiny. Kura's speeder cut through the canyon night, never slowing, never faltering. She rode like she knew every stone by heart. We shadowed her for hours, always at distance, always just out of sight. Finally, near dawn, she slowed. The canyon opened into a wide shelf with a docking platform carved into the rock. A shuttle waited there, small, unmarked, its engines glowing faintly. Kale raised his hand, signaling halt. We killed our engines and dismounted quietly, slipping into the shadows along the ridge. Kura parked, dismounted, and walked straight to the shuttle. The ramp lowered, and she disappeared inside without hesitation. The ramp sealed, the engines roared, and the shuttle lifted smoothly into the air. Kale's jaw tightened. Mantel. Ril nodded. She's going for orders. I grinned faintly. Well, guess that means so are we. We returned to the bikes quickly, covering the ground back to camp at speed. Vex nearly fell out of his chair when we burst in. She's gone already. Kale said simply, shuttle to Mantel. Ril added, unmarked. Direct route. Vex buried his face in his hands. Maker save me. You're actually going to follow her? Yes, Kale said. Tam scowled. This is suicide. I clapped him on the shoulder. Relax. If we die, I promise to haunt you. Shut up, he muttered. The debate stretched for hours. Vex argued about risks. Tam argued about resources. Rill countered with calm facts. Kale said little, but every word cut through the noise. By the end, it was settled. We would follow. Chapter 43, toward Ord Mantell. The decision had been made, but the camp didn't relax. If anything, the weight got heavier. Vex's fingers flew across his console as he pulled up manifests and schedules. Tam cleaned his rifle for the 5th time that day. Rill adjusted her scanner with quiet focus. Kale stood at the table, watching the map projection, his arms folded. I stretched out on the bench with a grin. Ord Mantell. Never been. I hear the locals are friendly. And by friendly, I mean they'll rob you before saying hello. Tam shot me a glare. This isn't a trip. It's a death sentence. Everything's a trip if you enjoy it, I said cheerfully. Vex groaned without looking up. Maker, why do you never stop? Because you'd miss me if I did. Kale's voice cut across the room, low and calm. Focus. That tone silenced the rest of us. Even me. For a while. The first problem was transport. Kura had taken an unmarked shuttle directly out of the canyon. We couldn't use the same one, but we had to reach Mantell close enough behind her to shadow her next move. Vex tapped his screen and pulled up 3 routes. Commercial freighters, supply runs, and a private charter. The freighters will take days. Too slow. The supply run is faster but packed with ice. The charter, he hesitated, is fast and discreet, but it'll cost. Rill studied the projection. We take the charter. Tam frowned. We can't afford it. Kale said simply, we can't afford not to. I leaned over Vex's shoulder with a grin. Besides, it sounds classy. Private charter, fast ride, maybe some free drinks. Shut up, Vex muttered. Rill began preparing gear immediately. She stripped her scanner down to components, replaced cells, checked seals. Kale cleaned his carbine again, then loaded spare charge packs into his belt. Tam muttered curses under his breath as he packed grenades into his kit. I spun my blaster once before holstering it with a grin. See? Ready already. You all take too long. Rill shot me a sharp glance. You take nothing seriously. That's not true, I said brightly. I take food and naps very seriously. Kale ignored us both. By nightfall, Vex had arranged the charter. Dock C, Bay 6. Leaves at dawn. No manifests, no questions. You'll ride quiet. Tam scowled. And if it's a trap? Vex shrugged. Then you're already dead. I clapped Tam on the shoulder with a grin. Don't worry. If it is a trap, I'll let you take the first shot. Fair's fair. Tam shoved me off with a growl. Sleep didn't come easy. Rill stayed up most of the night, checking her scanner again and again. Kale sat still on the bench, eyes closed but not asleep. Tam lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Vex didn't leave his console. I stretched out, pretending to sleep, but my grin kept flickering. Excitement, nerves, it was all mixed together. By dawn, we were moving. The starport at Dock C was a mess of noise and movement. Freighters loading crates, droids shouting confirmations, smugglers bartering loudly. We slipped through the crowd unnoticed, just another group in a sea of mercenaries and traders. Bay 6 was quieter. A small, sleek transport sat on the pad, its hull scuffed but intact. The pilot leaned against the ramp, chewing on a stick of something, eyes sharp. "You're my passengers?" he asked. Kale nodded once. "Yes." The pilot shrugged. "Credits first." Rill handed him a chit. He scanned it, grunted, and waved us aboard. Inside, the ship was cramped but clean. A few passenger seats bolted to the deck, a narrow corridor leading to the cockpit. We strapped in as the engines warmed. The pilot's voice came over the COMM. "Next stop, Ord Mantell. No guarantees after that." The ship lifted with a hum, repulsor straining before the stars pulled us upward. The canyon shrank below, the sky darkened, and the black of space swallowed everything. The ride was quiet at first. Rill studied her scanner, Kale sat still, Tam kept his rifle close, and I leaned back with a grin. "You know," I said, "for a private charter, I was expecting snacks. Maybe a drink service." "Disappointing." Rill didn't look up. "Be quiet." "Fine," I said cheerfully. "I'll just imagine the snacks." Tam groaned. Hours stretched into hyperspace. The stars blurred outside the viewports. Kale finally spoke, his voice low. "Mantell will be crowded. We stay close." Rill nodded once. "She'll expect to disappear in the crowd." Tam muttered, "Which she will, and we'll die chasing her." I smirked. Positive as always. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, Ord Mantell filled the viewport. The planet glowed brown and green, its surface scarred with industrial lights and sprawling cities. Traffic filled the orbit lanes, ships of every size weaving in and out. The pilot's voice came over COMM. "Mantell City Spaceport. That's as far as I take you. After that, you're on your own." Kale said simply, "Understood." The ship angled down, cutting through the atmosphere. The sprawl of Mantell City rose up, towering skyscrapers, crowded streets, endless noise. The shuttle docked smoothly, the ramp lowering into chaos. We stepped out into the crush of the spaceport. Traders shouted, droids wheeled crates, mercenaries barked orders. The air stank of fuel and smoke. Everywhere, eyes moved sharp, suspicious, curious. Rill adjusted her scanner low against her chest. Kale moved first, steady and unhurried. Tam followed, his hand near his rifle. I grinned as I took in the noise and chaos. "Lovely place," I said brightly. "I feel right at home already." "Be quiet," Rill muttered. We slipped into the crowd, blending as best we could. Rill kept her scanner low, flicking through signals. Kale's eyes scanned constantly, sharp. Tam scowled at everything. I whistled softly under my breath until Kale shot me a look that shut me up instantly. We didn't see her yet. But we knew she was here. Somewhere in the sprawl, waiting for her orders. Chapter 44, Into the Sprawl. The Mantell City spaceport was alive with chaos. Cargo droids clanked along steel decks, vendors shouted from stalls, and the air was thick with smoke and engine exhaust. Voices layered over one another in a constant wave, traders barking deals, pilots cursing, port officials waving data pads. We slipped into it quietly, just another group in the flood of bodies moving from one bay to the next. Kale kept his pace even, head turning steadily as he scanned. Rill held her scanner low, thumb tapping against its side every few steps. Tam followed close, his jaw tight, hand brushing against the butt of his rifle more often than it needed to. I fell in last, grinning faintly as I looked around. I like it here already. Noisy, crowded, smells terrible. Feels like home. Rill didn't look at me. Stay focused. Relax, I said cheerfully. I can multitask. Tam muttered, doubt it. Kale didn't speak. He just moved. The first step was finding Kura. Her shuttle had landed somewhere in the sprawl of the port, but Mantell City wasn't a canyon station. Here, ships poured in constantly. Rill glanced at her scanner, frowning. Too many signals. Interference from the port grid. I can't isolate her datapad yet. Kale asked, options. Closer, she said simply. I leaned over her shoulder with a grin. So we wander the busiest port on the rim and hope to bump into her? Excellent plan. She gave me a sharp look. I raised my hands. Fine. I'll keep my jokes to a minimum. For now. We moved deeper into the spaceport. The noise only grew. Bay doors hissed open, shuttles lifted on streams of smoke, traders hauled crates through the crowd. The smell of fuel clung to everything. Kale paused at a cross-section, eyes scanning both corridors. Rill checked her scanner again. East wing, she said. Stronger signals. Kale nodded and led us on. Tam muttered, this is insane. I clapped him lightly on the shoulder. That's the spirit. Shut up, he growled. The east wing was worse. More crowded, more chaotic. Vendors had set up stalls right against the walls, hawking everything from ration packs to scrap metal. Dockhands shouted as they pushed repulsor carts through the press of bodies. Kale slowed, his eyes sweeping constantly. Rill pressed closer to the wall, adjusting her scanner. I slipped behind them, grinning faintly as a vendor shoved a glowing piece of junk toward me. Best price on Mantel, the vendor shouted. I waved him off. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. The man cursed and moved on. Tam muttered, you're wasting time. Relax, I said. I'm making friends. Rill stopped suddenly, her scanner pulsing brighter. Signal spike. Close. Kale looked at her. Kura. Likely, she said. Datapad frequency matches her last trace. Kale's jaw tightened. Direction. Rill pointed. South corridor. Near Bay 31. Move, Kale said simply. We cut through the crowd, weaving between vendors and dockhands, following Rill's scanner. The noise pressed in from all sides, but we stayed tight, slipping into the flow without drawing attention. Bay 31 was smaller, tucked against the edge of the wing. The crowd thinned here, the noise dulling slightly. A shuttle sat on the pad, unmarked, its ramp still extended. Workers hauled the last of the crates away. And there she was. Kura stood at the base of the ramp, cloak drawn tight, datapad in hand. She spoke to a port official, her tone calm, her posture steady. Kale slowed instantly, raising a hand. We pulled back into the shadow of the corridor mouth, just far enough to see without being seen. Rill lowered her scanner. Confirmed. It's her. Tam muttered, perfect. We found her. Now what? I grinned. Now we watch. We're good at that. Kura spoke with the official for several minutes. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She signed a chit, handed it over, and gestured toward the shuttle. The official nodded, then left without further questions. She turned back toward the datapad, tapping steadily as if logging something. Her posture never faltered. Calm, precise, in control. Kale's eyes narrowed. Orders. Rill nodded. She's receiving them now. Vex's voice crackled faintly in our ears from the camp COMM. I've got her signal. Traced clean. Don't lose her. Kale tapped his mic. We won't. I leaned against the wall, grinning faintly. See? Already worth the trip. Be quiet, Rill muttered. Kura finished with the datapad and slid it back into her cloak. She looked around briefly, her eyes scanning the bay, then turned and walked into the crowd without hesitation. Kale waited until she disappeared into the press before moving. Follow. Distance. Rill adjusted her scanner. Still locked? I smirked. Here we go again. The chase through Mantel City began. Kara moved steadily, her pace neither rushed nor slow. She cut through the spaceport crowd like she knew exactly where she was going. We shadowed her carefully, always a few steps behind, never too close. The sprawl opened wider the farther we went. Streets filled with speeder traffic, vendors shouting from stalls, crowds pressing from all sides. Lights from towers burned overhead, mixing with the glow of hollow signs and street lamps. Rill whispered, "She's leaving the port." Kale nodded once. "Stay close." I grinned faintly as we slipped into the crush. Mantel nightlife. Beautiful. Neither answered me. Kara led us deeper into the city. Past the port streets, past rows of merchant stalls, into narrower alleys where the noise dulled slightly. She moved without hesitation, never glancing back. Rill checked her scanner. Still steady. No deviation. Kale's voice was calm. Good. Tam muttered over COMM from camp, "You're all insane. Following her blind into Mantel's Undercity? You'll disappear." I smirked. Thanks for the vote of confidence. We shadowed her for nearly an hour through the city streets. The crowds shifted, fewer traders, more mercenaries, smugglers, and freelancers. The air smelled of smoke and oil. Noise carried from cantinas and workshops. Finally, she slowed. She turned down a narrow corridor between two buildings and stopped at a door marked only with faint paint. She tapped her data pad, and the door hissed open. She slipped inside without a word. Kale raised a hand, signaling halt. We pressed into the shadows at the end of the corridor, watching. Rill whispered, "Signal steady." "She's inside." Kale's eyes stayed locked on the door. "We wait." I leaned against the wall with a grin. Perfect. Hours of standing in a filthy Mantel alley. My favorite. Rill gave me a sharp glance. I raised my hands. Fine. I'll complain quietly. Chapter 45, Inside the Walls. The alley was cramped and quiet compared to the roar of the streets behind us. Neon from a flickering sign bled onto the walls, painting the cracked durasteel door Kara had just walked through. The faint hum of the lock still echoed. Kale held up a hand, signaling us to stay put. Rill crouched near the corner, her scanner pressed flat against her chest. Its pulse was steady. "She's inside." "No movement yet." Kale's jaw tightened. "We wait." Tam's voice came sharp over COMM, irritation heavy in it. "Wait. You'll lose her. That building isn't a tavern or a warehouse. It's marked." Kale glanced at Rill. She checked her scanner again. "Encrypted COMM lines. The walls are blocking clean signals. I can't see inside." Tam snapped, "Which is exactly why you go in now. You won't get another chance. She's meeting someone, and if you're still standing in an alley when she leaves, you'll have nothing." I leaned against the wall, smirking faintly. I think Tam just volunteered us for breaking and entering. At least he's ambitious. "Be quiet," Rill muttered. Kale was silent for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "We go in." The door was locked again, but locks weren't much on Mantel. Kale pressed his gloved hand against the panel, studied it, then pulled a small tool from his belt. A quick spark, a hiss, and the lock clicked faintly. The door slid open. Kale moved first, silent and steady. Rill followed, scanner tucked away. I slipped in after them, grinning faintly. Breaking into strange buildings in the middle of Mantel's Undercity. Just another night. "Quiet," Kale said low. "Fine," I whispered cheerfully. "I'll whisper about how exciting it is instead." The interior was dim, lit only by low strips along the floor. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Corridors stretched left and right. Faint voices carried from deeper inside. Kale held up a fist, signaling silence. He moved forward, his carbine ready but held low. Rill stayed at his shoulder. I brought up the rear, blaster in hand, grin slipping smaller now that the walls pressed close. We moved slowly, our footsteps muffled against the metal floor. The voices grew clearer. Kerr's voice steady, calm. Transfer completed, crates delivered, waiting for confirmation. A man's voice followed, low and clipped. Orders will follow, further shipments. Rill's eyes flicked to Kale. He nodded once. We edged closer, hugging the wall until the corridor opened into a wider chamber. The room was larger than expected, its walls lined with crates and consoles. Kerr stood near the center, day top hat in hand. Facing her was a man in plain armor, helmet tucked under his arm, his hair streaked with grey. He held a day top hat of his own, scanning it slowly. Kale crouched at the edge of the doorway, eyes sharp. Rill leaned close, her breath even. I tilted my head, smirking faintly. Looks cozy. Kale shot me a glance that silenced me. Kerr spoke again. You said priority shipments. From where? The man's voice was firm. From Mantell. They'll move through here before dispersal. Rill's eyes narrowed. She whispered, local hub. Kale's jaw tightened. The man continued. Your role doesn't change. You receive, consolidate, and transfer. Nothing more. Kerr didn't flinch. Understood. Rill pulled her scanner slowly, keeping it low. She mouthed, recording. Kale gave a short nod. I leaned close, whispering cheerfully, we're basically spies now. Very professional. Rill gave me a glare sharp enough to kill. I grinned and held up my hands silently. The man stepped closer to Kerr, lowering his voice slightly. There's a tension on this line. Be careful. If you slip again, you won't get another chance. Kerr's tone stayed calm. I won't slip. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. See that you don't. He turned toward the far corridor, day top hat still in hand. Kerr stayed where she was, tapping notes into her own. Kale's eyes flicked to Rill. She shook her head slightly. Too many inside, she mouthed. Kale stayed still, watching silently as Kerr finished her notes. She slipped her day top hat back into her cloak, adjusted her hood, and finally turned toward the corridor opposite us. Kale raised his hand. We slid back into the shadows, pressing flat against the wall. Kerr passed by, her steps even, her face unreadable. She never looked our way. The moment she disappeared, Kale signaled retreat. We slipped back the way we came, careful, slow, silent. The door slid shut behind us as we slipped into the alley once more. Only then did Rill exhale quietly. Confirmed. Mantell is the hub. Kale nodded once. And he's her direct link. Tam's voice crackled in, sharp. And you didn't grab him? Or her? Kale said simply, not yet. I leaned against the wall with a grin, exhaling loudly. Well, that was fun. Quiet walk through a dark building, overheard some shady business, and nobody died. Productive evening. Rill rolled her eyes. Kale ignored me. Back at camp, Vex practically shouted when we relayed the recording. Mantell. Local hub. You have no idea what this means. Kale said calmly, explain. Vex pointed at his console, pulling up a map. It means she's not just running shipments through random relays. Mantell is the center. Everything above her filters through here. If you can crack this node, you can pull the entire chain. Tam crossed his arms. or get yourselves killed in the process. I grinned. Either way, it's not boring. Chapter 46, Waiting in the Alley. The door closed behind Kura, leaving us in the dim Mantel alley. The glow of a failing neon sign flickered across the wall, buzzing faintly. The street behind us still roared with noise, but here the sound dulled to a steady hum. Kale didn't move at first. He stayed crouched near the wall, eyes fixed on the door. Ril checked her scanner, keeping it low, its pulse steady. She's gone deeper inside, Ril said quietly. Kale nodded once. We wait. Tam's voice came sharp over COMM, frustration plain. Wait? You already saw her contact. You should have taken him then. Kale replied simply, too many inside. I leaned against the wall, smirking faintly. Besides, Tam, patience is a virtue. You should try it sometime. Shut up, he snapped. I grinned. See? No patience. The minutes stretched into an hour. The alley stayed quiet. Workers passed at the far end occasionally, pushing carts or shouting to one another, but none came near the marked door. Kale stayed still, silent. Ril watched her scanner, her expression unchanged. I shifted against the wall, stretching my legs. This is thrilling, I whispered cheerfully. Standing in an alley, staring at a door. Honestly, it's the highlight of my week. Ril didn't look at me. Be quiet. Kale said nothing. Fine, I muttered. Tough crowd. After another half hour, the door hissed open. We froze instantly. Two men stepped out, both in plain armor, helmets clipped to their belts. They spoke quietly to each other as they walked down the alley, their boots echoing against the metal floor. Neither looked our way. Kale's eyes followed them until they turned the corner and disappeared into the noise of the main street. Ril whispered, local muscle. Not handlers. Kale nodded once. I grinned faintly. At least they weren't talkative. I was hoping for a secret spilled right in the alley. Kale ignored me. Another hour passed. The alley stayed quiet again. The neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing louder for a moment before dimming again. I tilted my head back, exhaling. You know, we could have been in a cantina right now. Drinks, food, music. Instead, we're in a smelly alley waiting for strangers to walk through a door. Ril gave me a sharp glance. Focus. I am focused, I said brightly. On how boring this is. Kale didn't look at me, but his silence was enough to keep me from pushing further. The door hissed again. This time, a woman stepped out, cloak drawn tight, day top hat in hand. She glanced both ways down the alley before walking off toward the main street. Her steps were quick, her head low. Ril lifted her scanner slightly, eyes narrowing. Not Kura. Different signature. Kale asked quietly, orders. Ril shook her head. No. She's carrying data, not giving it. Kale's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice. Vex. Track her. Vex's voice came sharp in our ears. Already on it. Signal tagged. I leaned forward slightly, smirking. Another piece on the board. She looked nervous. Not like Kura. Ril said flatly, she's a courier. Different role. Still, I said cheerfully, it's nice to meet new people. Neither answered. We waited longer. The city noise shifted with the night cantinas swelling with laughter and music, speeder traffic thinning slightly. The alley stayed the same, dark, quiet, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Kale never moved. Ril kept her scanner steady. Tam's voice came over COMM occasionally, full of complaints we ignored. I finally whispered, if nothing else, this alley is building my patience. That's worth something. Rill gave me a look sharp enough to silence me again. Near midnight, the door hissed open a third time. Two figures stepped out together. One was Kura. The other was the grey-haired man we had seen with her before. We froze instantly, pressing into the shadows. Kura walked calmly, her posture steady, her hood up. The man walked beside her, helmet clipped to his belt, day-top pad still in hand. They spoke in low voices, too soft for us to catch. Kale's eyes stayed locked on them. Rill lowered her scanner, careful not to let its glow show. They reached the end of the alley and turned toward the main street. The noise of Mantell City swallowed them. Kale lowered his hand. We follow. We slipped into the street behind them, keeping distance. The crowd made it easier, mercenaries, traders, smugglers, all pressing in. Neon lights burned overhead, hollow signs flashed, music carried from cantinas. Kura and the man moved steadily through it all, never glancing back. Their pace was calm, confident. Rill whispered, still locked. Both datapads active. Kale nodded once. I smirked faintly as I ducked between two vendors. At least it's more exciting than the alley. Rill ignored me. Kale didn't react. They walked for nearly an hour through Mantell's streets, turning corners, crossing crowded intersections, passing cantinas and markets. Finally, they stopped at another building larger, its facade marked with faint symbols half scraped away. The door opened for them, and they disappeared inside. Kale raised his hand. We stopped across the street, blending into the crowd. Rill checked her scanner. Signal steady. Same encryption. Kale's jaw tightened. Another hub. I leaned against the wall, grinning faintly. At this rate, we'll have a whole tour of Mantell's secret doors. Maybe we should start a list. Rill gave me a sharp glance. Kale ignored me. We stayed there, across the street, watching. The crowd flowed past us, loud and busy, but our eyes never left the door. Tam's voice came through COMM, flat. So you're standing in another alley now. Great progress. I smirked. Better alley. This one has a view. Shut up, he snapped. I grinned wider. Chapter 47, watching the second door. The crowd outside the new building thinned as the night stretched on. Neon signs flickered, their glow painting the street in shifting colors. A cantina across the way grew louder with laughter and music, but the door we watched stayed quiet after swallowing Kura and the grey-haired man. Kale leaned against the shadow of a stall, eyes fixed on the building. Rill stood close, her scanner tucked low, the faint pulse of its screen hidden beneath her cloak. I stayed against the wall, grinning faintly as I watched the people pass. 2 alleys in one night, I whispered cheerfully. At this rate, we'll see every hidden corner in Mantell City. Very educational. Rill didn't look at me. Be quiet. Tam's voice crackled faintly over COMM, irritation sharp. You're wasting time again. They're inside. You should have followed. Kale said simply, too many unknowns. I smirked. That's what makes it fun. Shut up, Tam snapped. I raised my hands, grinning wider. Fine. Just trying to keep spirits up. We stayed there for an hour. The building's facade never shifted. No one entered, no one left. The noise of the cantina across the street carried laughter and shouting, but the door we watched stayed silent. Kale stayed still the entire time, eyes locked. Rill's scanner flickered now and again, each pulse confirming the signals were still inside. I stretched my back against the wall, exhaling loudly. This is thrilling. Really. Riveting entertainment. Rill glanced at me sharply. Patience. Patience, patience, I muttered. I've heard that word more tonight than my own name. Kale ignored me. Another hour passed. The street began to clear as the night deepened. Fewer traders moved through, fewer carts rolled by. The cantina stayed alive, but the rest of the street dulled. The door finally hissed open. We froze instantly. A man stepped out different from the one we'd seen before. His armor was newer, polished, with faint insignia scraped away. He adjusted the strap of his rifle, glanced both ways down the street, then walked off calmly into the crowd. Kale's eyes followed him until he vanished around the corner. Rill checked her scanner. Daytop had signature matches. He's linked. Kale's jaw tightened. Another contact. I smirked. Mantel's full of friends tonight. Be quiet, Rill muttered. The door stayed quiet again after that. Another hour passed, then two. The neon glow flickered weaker. The cantina finally began to dim as patrons stumbled out into the street. The city noise dulled to a low hum, Mantel resting at last. We didn't move. Kale never shifted. Rill's eyes never left her scanner. I kept leaning against the wall, humming softly under my breath until Rill gave me a glare sharp enough to silence me. Near dawn, the door hissed again. Kara stepped out alone. Her hood was up, her daytop had tucked inside her cloak. She didn't hesitate. She turned east and walked into the empty street. Kale raised a hand. We moved instantly, slipping from the shadows into the thinning crowd. Rill checked her scanner. Confirmed. Signal steady. Kale nodded once. Follow. I grinned faintly. See? Worth the wait. We shadowed her for nearly an hour through Mantel's streets. The city stirred slowly, workers opening stalls, droids wheeling crates, speeder traffic humming louder. Kara never slowed, never looked back. Finally, she stopped at another marked building, this one larger, its facade cleaner, its guards sharper. She tapped her daytop hat against the panel, and the door slid open. She walked inside without hesitation. Kale signaled halt. We pulled into the shadows of a side street, watching. Rill whispered, another hub. Kale nodded. I leaned against the wall with a grin. Mantel's full of surprises. We'll have a whole collection of doors at this rate. Neither answered. We stayed there the rest of the morning. The sun rose high, heat spilling into the street. Vendors opened stalls, traders shouted, carts rolled past. The building stayed quiet. Guards shifted now and then, but no one entered or left. Kale stayed steady. Rill's scanner pulsed faintly. I sighed loudly. This is the most boring stakeout in history. Rill shot me a sharp look. Focus. I am focused, I said brightly. Focused on not falling asleep. Kale ignored me. By midday, the door opened again. The gray-haired man stepped out, helmet clipped to his belt. He looked both ways down the street before turning north, walking calmly into the crowd. Kale's eyes followed him. We track him. Rill nodded once. Signal locked. I smirked. Finally. Some movement. We slipped into the street again, blending with the crowd. The man moved steadily, never rushed, never hesitant. He cut through intersections, crossed busy lanes, and passed rows of stalls without pause. Rill kept her scanner close. Still steady. Kale stayed silent, his eyes locked forward. I hummed softly as we walked, grinning faintly. Mantel tour continues. Hope there's a good cantina at the end. Be quiet, Rill muttered. Chapter 48, Choosing Shelter. The grey-haired man was still in sight, weaving calmly through Mantel City's crowd, his stride steady and unhurried. Kale tracked him without breaking pace, eyes sharp, movements controlled. Ril kept her scanner angled low, its faint pulse steady. I followed just behind, grin flickering as I glanced between stalls and vendors, blending with the noise of the street. Tam's voice came over COMM, sharp and tense. Cut it off. Kale didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the man ahead. Tam's tone hardened. You're burning yourselves out chasing him across Mantell without fallback. You don't even have shelter. This city eats groups like you whole. You need a safe house before you disappear. Ril spoke quietly, her tone calm. He's right. If we lose cover, we lose the trail. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't slow. I leaned toward my mic with a grin. I vote for a safe house too. Somewhere with chairs. And maybe food. My legs are tired already. Ril gave me a look sharp enough to silence me. Kale finally spoke, low and steady. Safe house first. We let the man slip into the crowd, his grey hair vanishing among traders and mercenaries. Kale didn't flinch. He turned into a side street, pulling us out of the press. Ril lowered her scanner, her expression steady but unreadable. Vex's voice came sharp over COMM. You're letting him go? After all that? Kale said simply, yes. Vex groaned. Maker save me. I smirked faintly. Relax, Vex. We'll get him later. Right now, I'm thinking about chairs. And food. Maybe a drink. Shut up, Vex muttered. The side street was quieter, though the hum of the city still pressed in. Vendors shouted farther off, speeders roared down the main lanes, cantina music carried faintly. Here, the walls were lined with faded signs and broken lamps. Kale stopped, his eyes scanning both directions. We find shelter. Ril nodded once. Needs to be close to the hub. Out of sight. Strong enough to hold. Tam's voice crackled again. And not crawling with Mantell thugs. I grinned. That narrows it down to, what, 3 buildings in this whole city. Ril ignored me. Kale moved on. We searched for hours. Mantell's sprawl was endless rows of stacked apartments, warehouses filled with noise, cantinas overflowing with shouting. We walked street after street, weaving between traffic, slipping past guards, scanning every corner. Kale never slowed. His eyes scanned constantly, sharp and steady. Ril checked her scanner for surveillance pulses. I kept my grin up, tossing quiet comments to break the silence. This one? I asked, pointing at a crumbling warehouse with half its lights out. Ril shook her head. Too open. Too visible. Fine, I said cheerfully. I didn't like the smell anyway. Kale ignored me. By late afternoon, we found it. A narrow building wedged between 2 taller ones, its sign half fallen, its door sealed. The windows were broken, the alley leading to it dim. Kale stopped, studying it. Ril scanned. Dead. No signals inside. Kale's voice was calm. We take it. I grinned. Perfect. Our new home. Cozy. Tam muttered over COMM, better than nothing. The lock was old, half-rusted. Kale forced it open with a quick twist of his tool. The door groaned as it slid. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Broken chairs lay scattered, tables overturned. Kale moved in first, carbine steady. Ril followed, scanner sweeping the corners. I stepped in after, whistling softly. Lovely. Needs a little work, but I can see the potential. Be quiet, Ril said sharply. We cleared the building room by room. The first floor was open, its walls cracked, its furniture broken. The second floor held smaller rooms, once apartments, now empty. Dust clung to everything. The roof access was rusted but intact. Kale checked every corner, silent and steady. Rill scanned for signals, nothing. I poked through drawers and cupboards, grinning as I pulled out a cracked cup. Look, we already have dishes. Rill glared. Stop touching things. Fine, I muttered cheerfully. No appreciation for scavenging. By evening, we had settled. Kale blocked the main door with a broken table, sliding it against the frame. Rill set her scanner by the window, its pulse steady. I dropped onto a chair with a grin. Home sweet home, I said brightly. Still no food, though. Tam's voice came over COMM, dry. At least you won't be sleeping in alleys. Vex muttered, this is still insane. Kale said simply, we're ready now. The night passed in silence. Kale sat near the window, watching the street below. Rill adjusted her scanner every hour. I dozed in the chair, arms behind my head, grinning faintly even as sleep tugged. Mantell roared outside, but inside our safe house, we held still, waiting. Chapter 49, Days in the Shadows. The safe house felt more like a ruin than a base, but after a few hours it started to settle into something livable. Kale kept his station at the window, unmoving as he watched the street outside. Rill spread her gear across one of the broken tables, repairing cracks in her scanner casing with steady hands. I had claimed a chair that leaned too far to the left but didn't collapse, stretching my legs across another. Mantell City never slept. Even here, in one of the quieter sectors, the hum of speeders, the distant roar of cantinas, and the shuffle of bodies moving through the alleys never stopped. Tam's voice over COMM came sharp. You'll need to watch that hub for days if you want patterns. Don't miss shifts. Kale said simply, we won't. I smirked, leaning my head back. Great. So days of sitting here staring out the window. Exactly the excitement I signed up for. Rill didn't look at me. Discipline matters. Sure, I said cheerfully. I'll discipline myself to nap at least twice a day. Very important. Kale ignored me, but the faint tightening of his jaw told me he'd heard. The first day passed in silence. Kale kept watch through the broken shutters. Rill logged datapad signals as they pulsed from the hub across the street. I rotated between the leaning chair, pacing the room, and peering out the cracks with exaggerated size. In the afternoon, the door across the way opened. 2 armored couriers stepped out, helmets clipped to their belts. They spoke quietly, glanced up and down the street, then moved toward the main avenue. Rill noted their signals. Secondary rotation. Not senior. Kale asked, frequency. Close to Kura's, but weaker, she said. I grinned faintly. So the B team. Be quiet, Rill muttered. That night, the hub door opened again. Kura stepped out. Cloak drawn close, datapad tucked inside. She moved steady, unhurried, slipping into the crowd without a glance behind her. Kale tracked her through the scope, his face unreadable. Rill checked her scanner, its glow pulsing. Confirmed. She's sending. Vex's voice came sharp over COMM. I've got it. Relays active. Don't lose her. Kale said calmly, we won't. I leaned against the wall, smirking faintly. She keeps this up, we'll know her schedule better than our own. No one replied. The next morning, we rotated watch. Kale sat in silence by the window. Rill caught a few hours of rest curled against the wall. I kept my chair, watching the street below, tossing commentary at every passerby. Merchant with a cart of ration packs, I muttered. Suspicious. Probably hiding data chips in the soup cans. Rill rolled her eyes without opening them. Kale said nothing. A half-hour later, a worker with a loader droid crossed the street. Definitely a spy, I said cheerfully. Look at that droid. Shifty eyes. Rill sat up and glared. Droids don't have eyes. Exactly, I said with a grin. That's what makes it suspicious. She muttered something under her breath and lay back down. By the third day, patterns started to appear. Couriers rotated in and out, always in pairs. The grey-haired man appeared once, walking calmly into the hub and staying inside for hours. Kura entered and left twice, each time carrying her day-top pad. Rill logged everything. Kura's timing is steady. Late night, early morning. The grey-haired man enters at midday. The rest cycle every few hours. Kale nodded once. I stretched in my chair, smirking. So he's the boss, she's the favorite, and the rest are the errand runners. Simple enough. Not simple, Rill said flatly. Fine, I said cheerfully. Complicated enough to keep you happy. She glared at me again. On the fourth night, the hub door opened for someone new. A tall woman in heavier armor stepped out, helmet under her arm, day-top pad clipped to her belt. Her stride was confident, her head high. Kale tracked her through the scope, his eyes narrowing slightly. Rill checked her scanner. Signal strong. Equal to Kura's. Kale asked, Senior. Rill nodded. Likely. I leaned closer to the window, grinning faintly. Finally. Someone who looks like they could actually give orders. Be quiet, Rill muttered. Tam's voice came through COMM, sharp. You've got enough now. Multiple couriers, a handler, a hub leader. What are you waiting for? Strike the building. Kale said simply, not yet. Tam's frustration hissed through the line. You're wasting time. Kale didn't respond. I leaned toward my mic with a grin. Relax, Tam. We're decorating the place with patience. It's very stylish. Shut up, he snapped. I laughed quietly. By the sixth day, even I was starting to feel the weight. Mantell's noise never stopped, the hub's door kept spitting couriers, and the air inside our safe house had grown thick with dust. Kale didn't waver. Rill logged every signal. I sprawled across the broken chair, staring at the ceiling. If I see one more courier carrying a day-top pad, I'm going to start rating their walking styles for entertainment. Rill gave me a sharp look. Focus. I am focused, I said cheerfully. Focused on not dying of boredom. Kale stayed silent, but I caught the faintest twitch of his jaw. That night, the door opened again. Kura stepped out with the grey-haired man. They walked together into the street, speaking in low voices. Kale tracked them, steady. Rill checked her scanner. Both signals active. Heavy encryption. Vex's voice crackled through COMM, excited. I've got them both. This is perfect. Keep them in range. Kale said calmly, we will. I grinned faintly, leaning against the wall. See? Patience pays off. Be quiet, Rill muttered. The stakeout stretched longer. Days blurred together, but the hub's rhythm grew clearer. Couriers cycled. Kura rotated. The grey-haired man appeared at steady intervals. The armored woman returned twice. Kale and Rill logged it all. I kept spirits up with endless commentary, most of which earned me glares. But through it all, we stayed invisible, waiting. Chapter 50, following the handler. The seventh day in the safe house started like the rest. Kale by the window, still as stone, watching the hub across the street. Rill crouched near the table, her scanner cables snaking across its surface. I slouched in the broken chair, balancing it on two legs with my boots kicked onto another. Mantell's street outside never changed, traders shouting, speeders weaving, the stink of smoke and fried food clinging to the air. The hub door stayed closed through most of the morning, guards shifting their weight in boredom. Ril glanced at her scanner. Kura hasn't left since dawn. Kale nodded slightly. The grey-haired man will. Tam's voice crackled through COMM, sharp as always. Then take him. He's the one who matters. Kale said calmly, we will. I grinned faintly. Finally. A field trip. I was worried we'd rot in this ruin forever. Be quiet, Ril muttered. It was midday when the door opened. The grey-haired man stepped out, his helmet clipped to his belt, day top hat in hand. His stride was steady, his posture calm. He didn't glance around, just merged into the flow of Mantell's street. Kale raised his hand. Now. We slipped out of the safe house, blending with the crowd. Kale set the pace, always a few steps behind the man. Ril kept her scanner low, its pulse hidden beneath her cloak. I trailed just behind them, grinning faintly as I looked around. Finally moving, I whispered cheerfully. Feels good to stretch. Kale shot me a look that shut me up instantly. The grey-haired man walked north through Mantell's streets. His pace never changed. He passed through intersections, crossed busy lanes, stepped past vendors without pause. Kale shadowed him with precise distance, never too close, never too far. Ril murmured, signal strong. Day top hat active. Kale nodded once. I leaned closer to whisper, we should give him a name. Grey hair is getting boring. How about bossy? Ril glared at me. Focus. Fine, I muttered cheerfully. No sense of humor. The man turned into a busier street. Speeder traffic roared past, lights flashing across his armor. Kale shifted us into the press of the crowd, keeping him in sight. Ril moved with calm precision, her scanner tight to her side. The man didn't slow. He crossed through the chaos without hesitation, his steps even. I whistled softly under my breath, earning another sharp look from Ril. I grinned faintly. What? I'm blending in. Everyone whistles on Mantell. Be quiet, she muttered. He turned down a side street lined with cantinas. Music blasted from open doors, lights flashed, patrons spilled into the walkways laughing and shouting. The man cut through it all without a glance. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking him through the noise. Ril's scanner pulsed faintly. Still steady, she whispered. Kale gave a short nod. I leaned close, smirking. I bet he's headed for a drink. Can't blame him. Smells better in there than out here. Neither answered me. The man passed the cantinas and entered a quieter sector. The buildings here were older, signs faded, windows cracked. Workers moved in silence, pushing carts, carrying crates. The noise of the city dulled. He slowed slightly, then stopped at a narrow building with its lights half dead. He tapped his day top hat against the panel, and the door slid open. He disappeared inside without looking back. Kale raised his hand, halting us. Ril checked her scanner. Signal inside. Encrypted. Kale's jaw tightened. I leaned against the wall, grinning faintly. Another secret door. We're building quite a collection. Ril gave me a sharp glance. I shrugged. Just saying. We waited outside, blending with the flow of workers. Kale never shifted, his eyes locked on the door. Ril kept her scanner low, its pulse steady. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, humming quietly until Ril silenced me with another glare. An hour passed. The door stayed shut. The man didn't leave. Tam's voice came sharp over COMM. You're just standing there again. You should have followed him inside. Kale said simply, too many unknowns. Tam muttered, cowards. I smirked. No, Tam. We're patient. Very stylish virtue. Shut up, he snapped. After another hour, the door hissed open. The grey-haired man stepped out again. He looked both ways down the street, then started south at the same steady pace. Kale signaled. We moved. Rill whispered, signal active again. Same encryption. Kale nodded. Follow. I grinned faintly. Back to the tour. At this rate, we'll see all of Mantel. Neither answered me. He led us deeper into the city, away from the central hubs. The streets grew narrower, dirtier. The air smelled of rust and oil. Few people moved here, and those who did kept their heads down. Kale slowed slightly, keeping more distance. Rill adjusted her scanner, her eyes sharp. Still steady, she whispered. Kale nodded once. I muttered cheerfully, lovely neighborhood. Maybe we should buy a place here. Very cozy. Rill gave me a glare sharp enough to shut me up. The man finally stopped at another building, this one taller, its facade marked with faint symbols scraped half away. He tapped his day top hat, and the door opened. He disappeared inside. Kale raised his hand. We pressed into the shadows, watching. Rill lowered her scanner. Confirmed. Same encryption. Stronger here. Kale's jaw tightened. I leaned against the wall with a grin. Another hub. Mantel's full of them. Be quiet, Rill muttered. We stayed there, silent, waiting. The street was nearly empty, the city noise faint. The door stayed shut. The man didn't come out again. Kale's eyes stayed locked on it. Rill adjusted her scanner every few minutes. I hummed quietly until Kale's glance silenced me. The night stretched long. Mantel roared in the distance, but here, we waited in shadows.